Good morning, everyone. I'm Sylvia Yunt, the Lawrence A. Fleischman Curator in charge of the American Wing, and with my departmental colleagues, a number of whom are with us today, alongside those in education, I'm very pleased to welcome you to Regarding History, American Art in Perspective, here at the Met in Lenapehoking, the ancestral homelands of the Lenape diaspora and long a home to many diverse indigenous peoples. We've organized this gathering today with the support of the Clara Lloyd Smith Weber Fund to mark the close of the Wing's 100th anniversary by exploring how the Met and other major museums are evolving their American art collecting practices and programming to become ever more welcoming, nonpartisan spaces of cultural memory where beauty, solace, and nuanced truth-telling are expressed and conveyed in distinctive visual and material ways. We will be addressing this focus in 3 different sessions today. First, through a keynote conversation between 2 esteemed Virginia-based historians of the United States, Christy S. Coleman and Edward Ayers. Then, in a curatorial roundtable with Leila Bermeo, Kathleen Foster, and Sarah Kelly Oler from the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, Philadelphia Museum of Art, and the Art Institute of Chicago, respectively, all colleagues engaged with current reinstallation projects. And then we'll end the day with a very special time with a noted contemporary artist, Titus Kaphar, who reckons with the absences and asymmetries of historical narratives in museum collections through his varied creative practice. Oh, there's my welcome. Okay. And speaking of historical narratives, in November 1924, the Met added to its constellation of collections a freestanding wing in Central Park dedicated to the so-called domestic arts of primarily 17th and 18th century British America. The American Wing was in effect a democratic, small d, experiment with both reformist and revivalist goals that emerged from the progressive era in United States history, created with a broad public and civil role in mind, if focused on narrowly defined concepts of American art and culture. And I'm showing you images of the original American Wing, the building designed by the New York architect and kind of progressive urban planner Grosvenor Atterbury, and an evocative promotional image of one of the then novel contextual period room presentations of decorative arts, here from the mid-18th century Virginia Marmion parlor, complete, there you see, with a colonial dame. Today, our current reinstallation, the American Wing at 100, demonstrates how far we've come in a century as a department and as a nation. Featuring some 600 works, longtime favorites, and strategic recent acquisitions by a diversity of cultural makers from across North America, the 2024 displays explore more expansive and inclusive narratives, or if you like, counter-narratives, of art, history, and identity that mirror and are constitutive of ongoing transformations in American life. At left is the new introductory kind of orientation, first floor space that investigates through rich, multi-layered works, generative origin stories of American art and culture at the Met and in the wider field and in American history. And at right is a view of 3 new thematic painting and sculpture galleries on the 2nd floor that pose questions about American identities, places, and temporalities, specifically dialogues between the American past and multiple modernisms. So this is the essential mission of the American Wing today, presenting and interpreting our mature and newer collections in pluralistic contexts that resonate with contemporary audiences, while not losing sight of their aesthetic and historical significance that informs our 21st century culture. This morning's opening conversation will provide a framework for understanding how such teaching of history is being reimagined and enlivened in wider museum and academic fields today by activating the archive, the power of place, and artist interventions, as seen here in Titus Kaphar's pendant tar portraits of Virginians William Lee and Ona Judge on view in the American Wing's Alexandria Ballroom on our 2A mezzanine level. We are privileged to have with us for this keynote dialogue Christy S. Coleman, Executive Director of the Jamestown Yorktown Foundation and Edward Ayers, Tucker Boatwright Professor of Humanities and President Emeritus of the University of Richmond. And I believe we have, yes, that slide. Ms. Coleman is an innovator in the museum field, having held leadership roles and positions in the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, the Wright Museum of African American History, and the American Civil War Museum in Richmond, while also serving as a historical consultant for a variety of film and television productions where so many viewers engage with history, of course, these days. She has been the recipient of numerous awards for her decades of impact, including 4 honorary doctorates. In 2018, Time magazine named Christy Coleman one of the 31 people changing the South, and in 2019, Worth magazine named her one of 29 women changing the world. In 2023, she received the David McCullough Prize for Excellence in American Public History. Dr. Ayers has won the Bancroft and Lincoln Prizes for his historical scholarship, been named National Professor of the Year, received the National Humanities Medal from President Obama at the White House, and is former president of the Organization of American Historians. As mentioned previously, he is also University Professor of the Humanities and President Emeritus of the University of Richmond, and former Dean of Arts and Sciences at the University of Virginia. He served as the founding board chair of the American Civil War Museum in Richmond, actually working very closely with Christy, and as executive director of New American History, dedicated to making the nation's history more engaging for a broad range of audiences. Dr. Ayers' latest book is American Visions, the United States, 1800 to 1860, in which he explores the complex lives and works of various cultural figures during a period of innovation, struggle, and dissent, including landscape painters Thomas Cole and Robert Duncanson. I came to greatly admire the scholarship and professional practice of both Ms. Coleman and Dr. Ayers while living in Virginia, and I'm so pleased today to welcome them to the stage of the Met.
Thank you so much for coming out. So the general premise you may have heard is that there's some kind of anniversary of the country coming up, and some people are thinking about what we might do about that, and I think there's some organizations that are working on it and so forth. And so Christy and I thought that it might be interesting to think about that in a way that's not quite so frontal as what are we going to do about this 250th anniversary, and think about history in general and the responsibilities of various kinds of places. Christy, as you just heard, is in charge of an actual place, Jamestown, Yorktown, whereas I'm working in a virtual place. So I love the phrase that Sylvia just used, activating the archive, trying to help teachers all across the country enliven their classrooms. So that's what we're doing. So Christy, you and I have been down this road before, this anniversary sort of descending on a place where we're associated with. Can you tell folks about that?
Sure. So in Richmond, the big question at the time was, how are we going to commemorate the 150th anniversary of the American Civil War, better known as the sesquicentennial? And one of the things that became very clear, especially with conversations with Ed and his guidance, we actually had formed a group in Richmond to look at this question. Now, you have to understand, this is 2009, and the challenge was that Richmond's relationship with the Civil War was beyond nuanced. It was problematic, right? And so the question was, how are we going to address it? We had all of these amazing historic sites and assets in the city. It is a city that for so long, and it really kicked off in the 1940s in ways that you can't begin to imagine. Well, actually you can. Gone with the Wind came out, and all of this romanticism around Confederates, and the Confederati went to work and created all of these other types of things. And sure enough, what happens is this city that had an extraordinarily rich history decided that it was going to hang its hat on the 4 years that it was the former capital of the Confederacy. And in a majority, at different points in time, a majority-minority city at different points in time, right? This was a problem. Confederate statuary, I think there was like 230 plus Confederate statues in the Richmond area, right? I mean, it's super crazy. And so we had to figure out, how do we do this? And brilliant Ed said, well, you do realize it's not just the commemoration of the Civil War, of the war itself. It's also it's going to be the 150th anniversary of emancipation. And that is where we bonded, and how we made the story in Richmond be very different from everybody else, because we were commemorating not only the American Civil War, but Civil War and emancipation, and nobody else was doing that. And it gave us an opportunity, because we were, like I said, we started these conversations in 2009. We had 2 years to get the community ready for what this could look like. And we did. And we did. Ed did something really remarkable. We also had a state commission. Virginia gets state commissions for historical commemoration all the time. It's just in their blood. And we'll talk a little bit about that some more and some other ones. But, Ed started things off, which I want you to tell them about that, what we did at the University of Richmond to kind of help frame what this could look like.
Yeah, we joke that the Richmond is kind of like a German word. Richmond, former capital of the Confederacy. Just like all those words are always connected in every story you read about us, and it's a heavy burden to carry around all this time. So 2009, we knew we had a long road ahead of us. So we brought together 16 historians to the University of Richmond and said, you don't know anything that happens after December 31st, 1859. Okay? Because they wanted me to, this would be the first event in the nation, they wanted me to call it the coming of the Civil War. And I said, if they'd known it was coming, they wouldn't have had it. So it's the era before the Civil War. And so people realized in 1859 that there was no idea that something like the Civil War was going to happen. Certainly not the end of the largest, most powerful system of slavery in the modern world in 5 years, which was impossible. And so we had 2,700 people show up from all across the country and listen to historians point out that the big news might have been the silver mines in Colorado, or, pretty sure that the Democrats will hold it together, and so this new Republican Party doesn't have a chance of winning and all that. But also, the most powerful moment was one of our colleagues showed on the big screen a single page of an account book from a man engaged in the domestic slave trade, and showed that he did $2 million worth of business in 1859 alone. And you can just hear the gasps from people, because they're there expecting to hear about Robert E. Lee or whatever, and suddenly get the sense that there have been nearly 500,000 people sold out of Richmond in the decades before the Civil War. And you can just feel the gravity shift. And suddenly people go, the Civil War's not a white story. It's not just owned by the descendants of the soldiers, but rather it's an American story in which the most important thing that ever happened in this country, the end of slavery, took place. And what was the relationship of all this? So that was the beauty of it, is that and my memory of it is that one of the best days of my professional career was in April of 2015, when you spoke from the steps of the Virginia Capitol, which had also been literally the capital of the Confederacy. You describe that day for us?
Yeah, so at that point, we had done 6 years of programming and events and hosted conversations all over the city about the meaning of the war. And we're going to get into this in a moment, because history isn't just history. We don't have the luxury of saying history for history's sake. History is a lived experience. History is about memory and commemoration and all those things that we're going to talk about here in a moment. But on that particular day, April of 2015, we were really hopeful because on the grounds of the Capitol, we had thousands of people assembled, and those thousands of people actually looked like our city in the correct proportions. Because a lot of times when you go to history things, especially around the Civil War, it's predominantly white space, right? And in this case, it wasn't. And we had artists projecting images on the buildings the night before to commemorate the fall of Richmond and the arrival of U.S. colored troops, which actually happened, right? And so we actually had black reenactors coming into the city.
On the same road
on
that
the
they
same
walked.
road that they walked, 150 years prior. We had speeches on the grounds. We had, a variety of organizations that were, but the key, I think, and what I wanted to impress upon people was that the way that we recall the Civil War is dead. This is our new, deeper understanding of the power of this story in the making of America and the making of a city. And, and everyone was a part of it. And when I tell you that changed the dynamic, we were somewhat hopeful for our city. And then a few months later, the summer of 2015 and early fall was a nightmare for us in Virginia. But I won't go into that part.
But the important part of all that is there was not a Confederate flag to be seen in April of 2015, and Christy gave a very powerful speech from the steps of the Capitol. But then 2 years later, Charlottesville goes from being this beautiful town to being an event, and you all remember what that was like. So every victory is hard won and cannot be taken for granted. And so as we come into the 250th of the United States, that same mixture of reckoning with honestly with the challenges before us, at the same time that we remain a hopeful vision of what this country has been and can be, is the powerful tension that we'll be talking about right now. So as we thought about this, we decided that an anniversary is not really a capacious enough word for what we're getting ready to have. There are 4 different processes, 4 different kinds of struggles going on at the same time. Celebration, fireworks, tall ships, bicentennial minutes for those of you old enough to remember what those were like, whatever we're going to have next year from this highly centralized process of presenting a patriotic portrayal of the United States. Then there's commemoration, in which you remember all the things that have happened, including wrongs and losses and sacrifices that people may not want to remember in the moments of celebration. And those 2 things of celebration and commemoration are inevitably, naturally, correctly in tension. Then you have 2 other pairs that are in tension. One is memory, the way that we all entwine ourselves in the history that we're living through or the history that we imagine in our families where they go. And then history, that dispassionate analysis of the historical record in which you're just telling the truth in a kind of a very disciplined way. So there's a lot going on, and we thought maybe pulling these strands apart would be helpful to as we see about this. So, Christy, what are you doing about celebration at Jamestown,
Well,
Yorktown?
I mean, at the Jamestown Yorktown Foundation, we operate 2 sites, right? We have Jamestown Settlement, and we have the American Revolution Museum at Yorktown. And so as part of our celebratory work, there's always somebody's going to fire a cannon or fire a musket, because people just love that no matter how many times you hate doing it. I still, for the life of me, yes, there will be fireworks. We also have tried to infuse this with a greater understanding of who those soldiers were, right? And so we have invited Black reenactors, indigenous reenactors, because the American Revolution is this remarkable thing. I mean, we say the French were there, and we, Lord knows you got Hamilton, and so now people have all these like thoughts, right? But we will celebrate with this kind of traditional thing. The more contemporary piece that we've added to our celebrations of the 4th of July, which a lot of historic sites do, is we have citizenship ceremonies that take place on that day or within that week as well. And those are always, for me, a really powerful thing, because these people have gone through it to get to the point where they can have their citizenship, this citizenship ceremony. So that's, sort of the public-facing piece of what celebration looks like at our site. And I'll be honest with you that there was a series of research that we had done back in 2022 and 2023 in partnership with others to try to get an understanding of what the American public wanted to see with regard to a celebration of the 250th of the nation, right? And it echoes everything Ed said. And we can see sort of the spectrum of people's interests. There are some that just want to celebrate what a great country and the greatest country on the planet, so they believe, right? And then you have people who are like, I'm really not interested in doing anything public because we haven't lived up to what we said we were going to be. So you have this wide spectrum. But within all of that, all of them expect that the historic sites are going to do something to celebrate and or commemorate, in this definition, the event. And so recognizing that we also have, because we're a general audience, we're doing those variety of things as well. So there are lectures and talks and presentations that really explore events that lead up to and take a hard look at and this has been argued before, the question of whether the American Revolution should be cited as sort of the first abolition movement. Because prior to it, the American Revolution, all 13 colonies are enslavers. They're enslaving colonies. And then and as we get to the Constitution, that shifts to where states either do outright emancipation or they do gradual emancipation schemes. So that becomes the question where even at the time, folks are recognizing that slavery is inconsistent with the message of the new nation. So all of that stuff that we talk about, they were just people of their time. People of their time understood what evils were. Their pockets were more of interest. And that is age-old and that is cultural-wide. And so we explore those things too. And we have a responsibility because it is tied to, the historical record is really clear about what is happening. What shifts is the questions that we ask. And this man has done a brilliant job of that in virtual space, as well as helping real spaces like ours find those components. So Ed, I'm going to throw it back to you. What are you thinking? What are you doing around this question of celebration? And then subsequently, what you're thinking about with commemoration?
So you see, in the celebration here, you'll see, and this is not just pandering. I did this well before Sylvia invited us to do this. This book that Sylvia mentioned, the American Visions, 1800 to 1860, I point out that basically by the end of the 18th century, we basically just have a sketch for a nation. We just have a rough draft. Who knows what this country is going to be? Slavery is part of it, but also, do we have a culture? Can anybody here paint a picture? Can anybody write a book? It's a famous quote, who around the world reads an American book or sees an American play? So, my wife and I drove to 60 historic sites all around the United States, in 27 states in an RV, Bertha, to see places where history happened in those decades when they were trying to figure out what this country was going to be, but also to see how people were interpreting that past ever since. And I have to tell you, people are doing a really good job. You know, there was a book back in the 90s, Lies Told Across America and so forth. In early 2020s, brave people were telling full stories in every kind of historic site. Now, Christy had already introduced me to the wonderful world of museum professionals. I knew what great folks they were. I've also seen lots of volunteers and lots of people. And the thing that was really striking, you go to this historic site, and every single time you're getting ready to talk to people, you have no idea who you're talking to, right? And they're all the way from young children to people in their 80s. Who knows what politics they have and what concern. And so Abby and I would just sort of stand at the back of the group, wherever it was, and watch. And over again, we saw the great empathy and concern and sensitivity of people. So we came to the Met, and what you'll see here is that there are people, Americans, who lived up to the founding ideals of the United States, even when it was a great struggle. So you'll see there a picture of the memento in Brooklyn of crossing Brooklyn Ferry of Walt Whitman. You kind of have to walk around pretty hard to find Walt Whitman down there. There's a beautiful fence with quotations from that poem displayed there. But then down below that, you'll see that we went to see the place where Edgar Allan Poe lived in the Bronx. And there's a little house in there in that scene. And what it would mean to try to create an American literature. You know, Poe's caricatured, you see him a lot yesterday for the Halloweens. But his dream was, let's make something that's authentic ourselves. And you go to that little house there in the Bronx, and you can sort of feel, and you can see the mirror that he looked into, which seems like a very Poe-esque. I'm kind of halfway expecting to see him looking back. And of course, the great art, Thomas Cole's The Oxbow and Asher Duran's Into the Woods. And the two that I like, Lily Martin Spencer, who's raising 10 kids in New Jersey because she can't afford to live in Manhattan, and is the great American genre painter. She has this painting here. You need to go see it in the museum if you haven't looked at it lately. Young husband who's dropping the chicken on the sidewalk here in New York, and the young wife who's trying to figure out how in the world do you make a stew and looks just disgusted about all this. And she has to color photographs to sell to support herself. And yet she's doing this incredible work that actually looks behind the curtain of what American life is like. And you go see, Washington crossing the Delaware in there, and it's beautifully presented, it's very effective. But you go around the corner, and you're seeing these people who are imagining, what does this American landscape look like? What does it mean? And you read about the Oxbow, and you'll see on the label that it's a more complex image than it appears. So what we're trying to do is to celebrate not just this moment, not just those guys in the wigs who wrote that great document, but rather what they were, other people who are imagining a more expansive vision of what America could be. So what we're trying to do is to celebrate, is to say, let's think about the consequences of what they created. What does a democratic culture actually look like? And here at the Met, you can see it in the wonderful new exhibit to the Renewed American Wing. Creates all this space in which you can imagine America in ways that you simply couldn't back when only a few people were represented as the creators of this nation. So we're trying to embrace celebration by embracing more of America.
Yes.
How about commemoration, Christy?
Well, like I said, commemoration is a really interesting thing, right? And the image that you're seeing behind us is actually from 1957. And I have that image there because my institution was established by an act of legislature in Virginia. Oh, sorry. See, I started as an interpreter, and I also had time as an actor, so filling the room with my voice is usually not a problem. So I forget. But this is being recorded, so I need to repeat what I said. So the image that you're seeing is from Jamestown in 1957. The organization was created by an act of the Virginia legislature in 1954 to get ready for the 350th anniversary of the arrival of the English at Jamestown as the first permanent English settlement.
And don't you forget it.
And don't you forget it. So certainly when the 400th came around in 2007, it was a slightly different conversation than what you see here. Yes, they recreated the 3 ships. Can you name them? And it's not the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. You know, the Susan Constant, the Godspeed, and the Discovery. They recreated these ships. They, recreated the fort, James Fort, as they saw it, and they did something really curious. Virginia decided to coordinate with the Rappahannock Nation in Virginia. And for those of you that don't know, yes, we have indigenous communities in Virginia. We have 11 state-recognized tribes and 7 federal tribes in Virginia, even though Virginia tried to wipe them out by a really interesting law called the Racial Integrity Act of 1924 that wouldn't recognize them. They either were considered white or colored, and you can guess which one most Virginians placed the Indians. So anyway, I digress. Commemorating this event. And so that is our origin story. And it really wasn't until they were preparing for 2007 that some decisions were being made about what kind of organization it would be moving forward. Because this was no longer the research, the scholarship had told us, this isn't just about the English setting here and bringing Christianity to the savages, and because it was quite a story in 57. But anyway, I was telling you about the Rappahannock. They had hired the Rappahannock Nation to represent the Powhatan peoples during that 1957 commemoration. And they set up the Indian Village. And it was quite a thing. Needless to say, it did not take long before the Rappahannock decided they wanted no part of Jamestown settlement ever again. And that would ripple through all of the tribes in Virginia, particularly those in our immediate area. It was a problem. So we decided that, like I said, back in prepping for 2007, there were a lot of conversations that were being had about the need to explore Jamestown in a much more deep way. Namely, the English weren't the first to come into the area. Yes, they were the first to have a permanent settlement there, but the Spanish were there 50 years before. Jesuit priests were in Jamestown from Spain. Y'all didn't know that, did you? Well, now you do. You know, and as a response to the presence of the Spanish, that the various tribes decided to align themselves in a confederacy for protection. So we needed to tell this richer story. Oh, and by the way, in 1619, 30 and odd Africans from Angola arrive at Jamestown. They are there, African peoples are in British North America before the Mayflower. But y'all don't know the names of those ships, do you? And there's reasons for this. So when we talk about commemoration now at Jamestown, we're talking about all of this in the making of America, because the idea that this was formed as a white nation for white people solely is inherently a lie. It is a myth that was created for an entirely different purpose. And the perfect example of that is why, as we talk commemoration, is why when we started talking about the founding of the nation and the founding myths, we all learned that George Washington could never tell a lie and chop down a cherry tree and had wooden teeth, for God's sake. None of which is true. He did have false teeth, and we have 2 sets of them in museum collections, not my museum collections, but in museum collections. And they're made of ivory and human teeth from his enslaved people. That's history. So why would we lie about that? And so commemoration means let's look at all of this to figure out who we really are so we can move forward. Where celebration is something else. But I digress. Go ahead, Ed. Take us to the next place.
Do you want to talk about that?
I do want to talk about this image. I said that the Rappahannock stopped, and then pretty soon the rest of the indigenous tribes would not have anything to do with JYF. So what JYF did, JYF, Jamestown Yorktown Foundation, what they did from when those fine folks left in the 60s, is they would dress white people in indigenous clothing and to do indigenous arts and culture. I came to the organization in 2020, 6 weeks before the pandemic, and we immediately formed not just a advisory group, but we have what's called the Indigenous Peoples Initiative, where it's about shared authority. And we listened to the tribes. What did they want to do with the space? How did they want the space interpreted? And the first thing they said is, get white people out of our clothes. And I was like, cool, we will take white people out of your clothes. And only a person who is an enrolled member can wear their historical clothing or regalia. Cool. And so now we have 9 of our 11 state recognized who are active participants in everything we do at the museum. And what you're seeing there is a photograph of a recent celebration that we had. The gentleman, his name is Sam McGowan. He's a member of the Mattaponi Nation. And he's on our staff, as well as several others that are paid members of our staff. And yes, consulting doesn't mean you just come in and we take from you. That's the other thing. As a historic site, I'm sorry, and I'm going off on a tangent, but this is an important thing. We tend to be in the museum community extractive. We're always talking about, ooh, if we communicate, if we engage with these communities, then they'll let us have. That's in a very extractive mindset. Collaborative mindset says, what assets do we have that support your community? It's about a relationship. It's about shared authority. It is about shared being. And so for us, the relationship that we have now with the Mattaponi and the Rappahannock and Chickahominy and the Northern Rappahannock and all of them, it's extraordinary from where we were. So that's why you're seeing Sam in full regalia, and it took place at our site. They had this, it was amazing. They came basically to bless our ground for the changes.
Very imposing.
Oh, he's a big dude. He's like 6-something. Wow. He's 6'3", 6'4". He's a big dude. He's big, yes.
So, in the same way that we wanted to sort of expand our idea of celebration, we can also expand our idea of commemoration, which turns out is happening all the time, all across the country. So what I'm showing you here is a project that we run called Bunk. It's named after the Henry Ford quote, "The history is more or less bunk. The only history that matters, a tinker's dam," he said, "is the history we make today." So Bunk is the history we make today. It's the curation every day of, and so this is different all the time, bunkhistory.org, over 500 different kinds of publications online, all political perspectives, woven together in ways that will startle you and instruct you. So if I did a search for commemoration, which I did before we were here, so you didn't have to watch me try to remember how many M's are in commemoration, you see we have 358 articles about commemoration. And you can see it's organized by memorialization and historical memory and cultural memory and monuments, Civil War memory. And then, or you can also search it by people. But what you'll see, and here's our friend Annette Gordon-Reed remembering Juneteenth, and wrote a book about this. But what you'll see is that there are, you can search, these all connect to everything else in a kind of a web of association. But you can also say, well, I'd like to know, is any of it happening where I live? And these are links to all the places where we have articles about commemoration. And you can see the whole United States, and again, tied together by all these themes. So if those of you who are teachers, you can find your own place in here to see it's something important people to understand is that every day we're commemorating and sometimes celebrating the very land we walk on, no matter where we live. There's a history everywhere. And I think that's something we tend to forget, maybe in this commemoration. It's like if you don't go to Philadelphia, you're not really going to see this thing, right? Or a battlefield. In Yorktown, you got to go and see it. But there's also history happening sort of beyond the camera's frame. And so with Bunk, you're able to embrace all the United States and to see all the different things that commemoration is, to be able to see how we changed from 2015 when Bunk begins to the present, and watch going through things like Richmond and Charlottesville, how it is that people are constantly recalibrating what deserves to be remembered, how might we remember it. And you know, the powerful story you just told about the Native people in Eastern Virginia, that's happening all across the country. And in some ways, the struggles that we're having now about woke and DEI are a reaction against the broadening of the story. And some people see that as an erosion of the true story. Other people see it as an enrichment of the true story. Finally, the telling of the true story. So by looking at the different ways and thinking about commemoration as a subject that you can then follow any of these one themes throughout, we can get a better sense. We can kind of take stock as we get ready to enter this 250. What's at stake? What are the issues? What are the mistakes that we've made before? What are the boundaries that still need to be expanded? So with Bunk, we do this so that you can actually see in a way you can't see anywhere else the entire universe of discourse, as they would say, about all of this. So, but anything you're interested in historically is in Bunk, history.org. And it's nonpartisan, it's not apolitical, it's free. We don't send you an email later trying to sell you something. It's just like, here's what America is thinking about its past every day. A constant reckoning, a constant recalibration. And I would say this, the goal is for young people to understand that history is not this done thing that's sort of mummified in their textbooks that they have to memorize, but rather a living process that they are a part of and will help shape. So that's what Bunk is about. It's designed to broaden our understanding or deepen our understanding of what history itself is. Other direction?
Other direction.
And I will say here, so we're partnering. New American History is the other part of what we're doing, newamericanhistory.org and bunkhistory.org. Monticello has invited us to come in and use some of these techniques that we're developing to amplify the story that they're telling. I'm a fellow there this year. The idea is, I bet quite a few people are going to think that maybe the home of Thomas Jefferson might have something to say about the Declaration of Independence, right? And what are they saying? So this is a digitization of a project they made there, actually bringing up the democratic conversations that Thomas Jefferson himself hosted at Monticello. And so, but we're going to be creating a video conversation. We're interviewing the historical societies of all the 13 original colonies to tell us what was happening in their locale. What were women doing during all this? How about black Americans during this moment? And what was your own state's, what did it have at stake when it goes to Philadelphia? Then you'll be able to come into these videos and answer those one questions and get 13 different answers. Or you'll be able to go submerge yourself and see the cool artifacts and art that they want to show. So we're trying to broaden and deepen the story virtually so that people who don't live in one of the 13 colonies can understand it, but also put South Carolina and Massachusetts in conversation. So what we're trying to do is, we're living in this, we hear every day about, oh God, AI is going to take over history. We're the second most endangered profession, by the way, after translators, because people imagine that all history is knowing all this stuff like the names of those ships, Christy, and that don't understand. I mean, if you ask AI, can you do history? It goes, no, not really. History is actually humans, and it involves empathy. I don't have any empathy as this machine. But what we have the capacity to do is to make something that can appear in every classroom in America tomorrow. And so we're trying to seize that possibility to turn something that seems so frightening and dehumanizing into fact something that actually is an extension of the humanities and what it means to actually have a history.
Yeah, yeah.
So how about memory?
Right, so memory is this really crazy piece, right? It is about the personal experiences of communities that sort of, or the individual's personal. We heard this a lot when we were going through the commemoration of Civil War and emancipation, where people said, well, my great-granddaddy. Now, these are people who were accustomed to sitting on the porches and hearing these stories, you know, passed from one generation to another. And these oral histories and these family stories are fine, but they're very personal. They're very personal, and therein lies the problem. You cannot say what you experienced on X day is the only story that matters, and yet sometimes that's exactly what we do in the telling of American history. We only pivot on one group's experience versus the combination of experiences that would give us a greater understanding. And yes, the cycles will flow through at different points in time, but, you know, again, I told you the story before about some of the changes that we've been making at JYF, and this image is one where we also embrace memory because it creates something that we do think is very powerful, and that is connection with each other and within families and with other communities. And in this image in particular, this is an indigenous member of our staff, and you know, clearly it's an African-American family there with him. What's interesting to us is that when we think about this idea of building memories together around this shared past, ultimately, yeah, our goal is about building empathy. And this is critical, especially like just yesterday or the day before, our vice president said the most outrageous thing, and I'm not trying to be political here, but it was outrageous to suggest, because it is not historically true, nor is it archaeologically true, that, well, you know, there are tons of dead babies buried with indigenous sites. That is nonsense. Absolute nonsense. It is racist, most horrible thing I've ever heard. And so our hope is, because people have encountered not only interpretive staff, but indigenous personnel who work at our site, and they're able to have this be in conversation about culture and history and meaning and creating and art and all of those things that are part of the daily living, that experience will hit them before they believe the foolishness like something like that was said. Does that make sense? So that's what we're talking about here is we are a place called a living history site. No, they don't pretend to be people of the past, but they are sharing the worlds of the past in some really unique ways. And that, again, creates memory, it creates empathy, and so forth.
Ironically, memory is not always what you might think. So Christy told you the story about how we worked to kind of broaden the story of the American Civil War. And I was state witness about the removal of the Robert E. Lee statue and so forth. And then I was invited to participate in a book about Civil War graves. And I'm from way up in the mountains of North Carolina and Tennessee. I asked my grandfather one time why we never talked about the Civil War. And he said, son, we shot each other. And so I felt completely disconnected from the story of the Civil War. I didn't really have any of that. But then my great uncle did a DNA test and wrote a thing, and it turned out that I had an ancestor, Ansel Randolph, who's buried in the picture on your right there in Oakwood Cemetery in Richmond. So 12 miles away from where I was having all these conversations. And the statue, the marker next to him is where he's not buried, but next to his family way up in the mountains of North Carolina, because he was thrown into a grave of 4 other men after he dies very early in the Civil War. He's 21 years old. And so that's, you know, the Sons of Confederate Veterans have put up that sign next to him. So, you know, my memory of myself had been sort of disconnected from the Civil War. And now it turns out that right under my feet, I had a connection from the Confederate side. And how did we know about this? Because of Ancestry.com, Find a Grave. So it turns out that our memory is getting deeper and richer all the time. We think of memory as something that's fading and the past growing ever farther away. But because of this digital world in which we live, the past is actually closer to us than it used to be. And so genealogists seem to me to sort of seize on the possibilities of the digital media better than anybody else. And so I was sort of a beneficiary of that. And I think it's useful to remember that we're all implicated in history in ways we don't even realize. And so don't think so much about yourself. To think about somebody whose history brought them to a different place. But to think about, Ansel, and, we have a letter from his brother who watched him die there in Chimborazo Hospital under a big tent in the summer of '62. And he says, but, he's gone to be with Jesus, and I never heard him curse or take a drink. And that's sort of the family memory of all of that. Which side he fought on is not really the main point. So there we have celebration, commemoration, memory. And the point about memory is that Christy and I had many conversations with people who care a lot about this in Richmond, often standing next to those statues and telling us about what it meant to them. And also had an elderly black woman came to me one time and just squeezed my hand. She said, Dr. Ayers, my parents took me to see those statues when I was a child and said, these are for us to tell us to be quiet. And I would tell that story to other white people. They go, no, that's not what we meant. So I think we've seen, memory it makes history matter to people, yes. But it's also a combustible material, right? And so it's important, as those of us who think about the next aspect of all this, of history, to remember, why do people care about history? It's because they think they have a memory of it in some way. So do you want to talk about that, or are you ready?
Yeah,
is this history?
Yeah, this is another example, right, of this combination of memory creation and really rethinking. When it comes to war in particular, sometimes it's really about glorification versus just how gory and horrible it was. So just how horrible it actually could be and was. And so that's something else. So when people come through the encampment sections, we create memory for them about the tragedy of war and the meaning of that. And literally not less than a half a mile from our site lay the bodies of hundreds and thousands of the dead from the American Revolution, actually. And so, in ways that people tried to protect them and to save them. And so it's far less common, it does happen, but it's far less common that we encounter people who know that they are direct descendants with the American Civil War, unless, of course, they're the dames of the dames or the sons of American Revolution and the daughters of the American Revolution. Those types of groups, the Cincinnati, they come through. But the vast majority of Americans don't have the same sort of ancestral claim in the same way. They have an ideological claim. And to me, that is immensely important. That's the piece where we acknowledge that Americans, regardless of their ethnic backgrounds or their naturalization backgrounds or what have you, have a claim, a space that they have attached. They have an ancestral connection to the ideals laid out in 1776. And as we think about even contemporary history, you remember that in every progressive movement to expand the meaning of America, it was always put forth that we hold these truths, right? We hold these truths. And people have forced the nation to, at different points in time over its 250-year history, that those words meant me too and should mean me too. And I think that's powerful. So these are some of the things that we try to do at our site, is sort of that inheritance that belongs to everyone who calls themselves an American.
So what's the role of history? I mean, what's this picture showing about history?
Well, this picture in particular is about the surgeon. This one in particular is about the surgery, and it is particularly about inoculation, where they made the decision that they were going to inoculate the soldiers to save their lives against smallpox. And so they are inoculating all the soldiers. So in this image, we're showing what that meant. And it did save soldiers' lives. So that's why. I know I put up seemingly random pictures, but they have meaning, Ed.
No question here.
Yeah, that's why we have it there, right?
Well, it's important, as you say, that, the danger of reenactment is that people all remember it as the charging and the firing of the guns, and then
Right.
you get back up and go to McDonald's afterwards,
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
But instead, and we certainly, the American Civil War, and
We have that too.
Christie created this American Civil War Museum, which really focuses on the suffering. 150,000 men died all around Richmond, and Richmond is a giant cemetery in many ways. And people don't really want to think about that as
Right,
much.
that there were more dead people in the Richmond region than there were living at different points in time,
Wow.
right? So, yeah.
So sometimes, does history generally involve telling people stuff they don't want to know?
Absolutely. That's where the fun is. No, I mean, history is always about asking the question about who we are at the end of the day. To me, that's what this is. It's from the first grad student that says to you, well, Dr. Ayers, we read about this, but can you tell me what happened with so-and-so? And you look at them and you go, you tell me what happened with so-and-so. And it sends them back to the historical record. They may discover something else. And that's the thing. We're always finding new things, whether it's coming up out of the ground or in grandma's attic. Something shows up that may make us re-examine what that
No, this is wrong,
is.
Christie.
No.
So history is all about questions and not answers?
It's all about questions. That's my
Why
view.
didn't you tell me 40 years ago when I got in there?
Well, I mean, with all the stuff that you write, at the end of the day, you started with a question. What was it like, when you did the shadow piece, right? You're like, what was it like for this Union community versus this Confederate community that are less than 20 miles apart along some artificial border? How are they responding? That's a question, Ed. And yes, you gave us some answers. Thank you very much.
The questions are...
But the questions are what leads it, I think.
Which is not really the way we often teach it, right?
Correct.
And
that's the
we all
problem.
know that kids today don't know any history. They can't even tell, and it turns out that every study, anytime, has shown that Americans never knew any history,
Yeah.
right? Or the history they know is the history they want to believe,
Precisely.
right?
Precisely.
And so it's sometimes, you and I both have been involved in this. So here's this movie that everybody loves. Come and tell us what's wrong
Right.
with it, right? So sometimes being a historian feels kind of like being a surgeon. You
Right.
know, you're the one that has to do the nasty work of, okay, I know that you think that, but it was really this way. But in fact, you think it was this way, but it was really this way. There's a lot going on. So you were talking about the ideals and how America really is created out of ideals rather than just a group of people.
Right.
So one of the things that that we are doing is including more people in the story of the United States. So this is a part of American Panorama, which really talented people at the University of Richmond have created a whole series of maps that embrace the entire population of the United States. This is the foreign-born population of every county in the United States from 1850 to the present. And it works really in a cool way. So you see, I put in Westchester, and so that's in 1950. And you can see the people here in Westchester come from Italy and Germany and the UK and Ireland. Okay? Let's go to 2010, and you can see how it's turned entirely. Now it's Mexico, Jamaica, Ecuador, Dominican Republic, India, Italy, Guatemala. And what this does is that you go to your county, your students, and say, so where's your family from? And suddenly people see that America is woven of all these intersecting lines from all over the world. And that everybody in every one of those seats in these classrooms has a part of American history. Whether they lived here just a few years, even a few months, they're a part of those ideals. But being able to see how immigration has changed and how it differs from one place to another and how it connects to all across the world is an important lesson for everybody to know, especially maybe at this 250th, which it's interesting. What do you say to people whose families have lived here a short period of time? What stake do people have who come from these countries in this 250th anniversary? And so part of the conversation is, well, if you're not genealogically related to the founders of the nation, you don't have a legitimate stake in this country. And I think, maps such as this and others that we have created show that America is constantly recreating itself. So we have one moment that we say, but how wonderful is it that even though we know from history that Thomas Jefferson didn't mean it with the full capaciousness that we mean today, that all men are created equal. How fortunate are we that that is a foundation that can grow with the nation.
Yep.
And that can expand to include women. And it can expand to include people who have been held in perpetual bondage for 200 years. And it can be expanded to people who are struggling to find a place for themselves and their children in this country today. So as we think about celebration, I'd love to celebrate that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'd love to commemorate how that's been contested, right? You showed the 1957 picture, and it was all about the British landing. But now we're able to harvest more of the memories of more of the people of how did you make a place for yourself in Westchester, and you're from Italy in 1950. That seems unproblematic to people. Of course, they're great Americans,
Right.
What do we do with it today? How do we calibrate, put all those things together to make sense of where we are today? So we're trying to show that it has required everybody who has lived on this piece of the world to make this history, right? And we should not be surprised or even disheartened that there's conflict and disagreement. We shouldn't be act as if that is undermining our love for the country. That's an equation that you're hearing a lot about right now. Do you hate America? That you want to focus on slavery and the dispossession of the continent from the native people? Why don't you love America? I would say if you love America, you want to embrace those stories and all the people involved in it to figure out how are they to be woven into the American story. And I know I can see from the pictures, Christy, that you are doing that every day. So how do you think we might use this 250th anniversary in your imagining of what's the best it can be? What would you like to see?
Well, I mean, that's what we have been really trying to lean into in Virginia. Like I said, we're this commemoration state, so yes, there was a commission formed in Virginia for the 250th. And the remarkable thing, like the Civil War, Virginia has extraordinary historical assets. From Colonial Williamsburg to Yorktown to Monticello and Mount Vernon and Mount Pillier. And I mean, we have these places where the bulk of where we think of the founding fathers are there. But when you go to these places and spaces, that's the beautiful thing, is the expansiveness of the stories now. You go to Monticello and you absolutely are going to hear about all the conflicts and contradictions of Jefferson's world. Right, when you go, you're going to learn about the Hemmings family and the Grange family and the people's the 600 plus people over time that were enslaved there to create that world that gave him time to think, and how it challenged, their presence challenged his ideas in a number of ways. Talk about complicated human beings. Thank goodness that they were, right? And so in Virginia, we have the VA 250. We, rather than creating a whole slew of programs directly, what Virginia decided to do was to lean into our assets like we had with the Civil War commemoration. And the one thing that we have a mobile museum that our museum, Jamestown Yorktown Foundation, curated. Well, we're partners in curation of that one, as well as a primary exhibition that we partnered with Virginia Museum of History and Culture on. So the mobile museum travels all over the state into communities that may or may not have historical assets. The exhibition is in Central Virginia, and then it'll come home to us July 4th, 2026. In the meantime, we are doing other types of exhibitions like this one, this whole conversation about what does America mean to you. We just opened an exhibition, Fresh Views of the American Revolution, using folk art by Oscar de Maya, and we asked contemporary artists to create their own works to, whether it's spoken word or music or arts or sculpture, to around the 5 themes that have been established for this show. And so it's one of many things. Again, we do stuff every day around the American Revolution, but putting in special experiences like this, just as the Met is leaning into history, history institutions are also leaning into art because they are expressions of a people at a particular moment in time, right? So that's what you see here. You can go to our events, our Learn tabs. I'm not going to open them up because mine don't do all the funky and fun stuff Ed's does. But you can go here if you're an educator in particular and you want to learn more. Under the Learn tab, we do have a number of our assets available to you. We have videos that have been produced. We have links to our collection. Because we do have a variety of items in our collections that are available to you. Homeschools, you know, if you're a homeschooler, we have resources for you. If you're a teacher, we have a whole slew of materials for you, regardless of the age that you teach. So again, all of these institutions, just like what you're seeing here, we are leaning into how can we help people get this. And what's so crazy is there's so much content that's available to people. It still stuns me that all of the fake content out there, the deliberate misinformation stuff that's out there is being used. And I think part of it is we haven't promoted ourselves that way. And I love what Ed has done and has been doing for years. This is the master of digital history, by the way. He's being relatively humble over here. But this guy is the master of digital history. When you take content and data and visualize it, people see their world completely differently. I mean, the first time he showed me something several years ago, it was a map that showed the migration patterns of African Americans after freedom came. And you realize why they're going to certain places and trying to reconnect to family members. It's an extraordinary piece and really helps us understand things in a very different way. But we got no minutes left. I do have a tendency of talking too much. I'm so sorry. The light is flashing red. Ed, this has been fun.
It has been. I want to say one final thing.
You got 2 things. Yeah, you get the last words.
Which is that when I teach first-year students, I ask them, why would you take a history class? You've had history like 4 different times, and why would you? And they had 2 answers. One, I had a great teacher who made me realize this is a living subject, or I went somewhere. And the thing is, we're getting ready to create memories of how we commemorate this moment in our past. It's a great responsibility that all of us have. Whatever circle that we have, here's our chance to expand our idea of what America is and sort of keep it alive for another 250 years. Thank you folks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christy and Ed, there's a light, for giving us that really rich and inspiring conversation, sending us all out to think about how we can continue to experiment with how we are bringing history closer, as they said, and kind of enlivening it for our diverse publics. We will now have a lunch break, and you can find food a couple places in the museum, as you know. Briefly, our cafeteria, Lehman Wing, the Balcony Cafe on the second floor, also the American Wing Cafe in our Engelhardt Court. And of course, if you head to the American Wing, we hope you might take a quick spin through some of the reinstalled galleries or have a look at some of our special exhibitions, the great Ojibwe modernist, George Morrison, Emily Sargent, Sister to John, 2 exhibitions on view right now in the wing. And then the second half of today's program will begin promptly at 1:30. I think the doors will open a little after 1 with our curatorial roundtable with 3 wonderful colleagues visiting from different major cities, followed by the concluding presentation by Titus Kafar. So we'll see you soon. Thank you so much for being here this morning.
Just a tad, maybe.
Well, welcome back, everyone. Hello. Thank you for joining us. And for those of you who are here this morning, we had a really inspiring dialogue between Ed Ayers and Christy Coleman that I think helped frame this major commemoration, celebration moment we're approaching next year. But some of this conversation is both forward-looking and also a little retrospective, I would say. But we're so excited to have 3 fantastic colleagues, respected colleagues as well, from so-called encyclopedic museums like the Met, but from 3 different urban centers with very distinctive specificity of place and individual histories, to really discuss some topical issues in our field, in the museum world, in academia, in our respective and shared curatorial work. And we are sharing a lot of this work. I feel like we all kind of approach this work as a form of public practice that's grounded in scholarship, of course, but also really thinking about our audiences and the visitor experiences as people are coming to our institutions. And we're going to hear from each curator a little informally. You're going to have to look at us for the next hour on this stage to hear about their current reinstallation projects. And then we're going to discuss a few relevant points that certainly we've all been talking about and feel like we'd like to surface for you in the audience. So we'll go in alphabetical order, beginning with Leila Bermeo of the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, and then we'll hear from Kathleen Foster at Philadelphia Museum, and Sarah Kelly Oler from the Art Institute of Chicago. So we'll start with Leila.
Great. Thank you so much, Sylvia, for that warm welcome and for organizing this incredible day of conversation about how we can best connect people with American art. I'm so honored to be up here sharing the stage, especially because my very first internship as an undergrad was at the Art Institute of Chicago. And then really my first curatorial fellowship was at a place called the Philadelphia Art Museum, working for someone named Kathy Foster. Exactly. So as Sylvia mentioned, I'm now curator of paintings in the Art of the Americas department at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And this was a place that I always wanted to be, because when we say American art at the MFA, we mean that we are responsible for collecting, presenting, and interpreting not just art from the United States, but from all over Latin America and Canada, including indigenous and island nations. And many of us here today probably remember the watershed moment when the wing opened in 2010. So at the time, I was a first-year master's student at Williams College taking class with Alan Wallach, who's here in the front row. And I stood in a line that wrapped around the block to see that new building with its 50 galleries dedicated to art from across the Americas from the pre-Hispanic period all the way up through the mid-20th century. And as a staff member of that department for about the last 10 years, I'm part of a team that tries to think very seriously about how we can live up to that inclusive hemispheric vision. We've known for a long time that when you walk through that door and you see this first gallery of 18th century art, which is the room that most visitors experience as the entrance to the wing, that inclusive vision is not what you see. And perhaps what's most striking about that, all those rows of white faces looking at you, is not even that they don't represent Boston now, but actually that they also don't represent Boston in 1775. So I just want to quickly describe a few ways that we've been reinterpreting this 18th century collection and then move into a discussion about our major reinstallation of these galleries. So starting this January, our central spaces on the first floor of the wing will shut down. We're gonna clear out everything you see and reinstall 8 galleries with new themes. And this will open on June 20th, 2026 to coincide with the 250th anniversary of the United States. And our thinking, our kind of planning around these changes has really been informed by different changes in interpretation that we started during the pandemic. So that was a moment when we knew we wanted to make changes to these galleries, but we couldn't actually physically move a lot of objects. And so a lot of the interventions were in terms of what we call interpretation or different ways of telling stories. So in 2020, we created a new introductory wall with special loans of paintings by the Kiowa artist T.C. Cannon. And these are works that raise questions really about museum displays themselves. Who gets to be a collector and who is typically positioned as the collected? We wrote a new text panel that stated the questions that are at the center of our work. So what do we mean by Art of the Americas? Who do we describe as an American artist? And we also declared these grand ambitions, and you can kind of see them here, that what we were gonna do in these galleries is really amplify creative voices that have been underrepresented in our own spaces, so including women, indigenous artists, black artists, artists of color, self-taught, and folk artists. And we were rightfully criticized for setting up what looked like a bit of a bait and switch with galleries that didn't actually match up with what you saw. But I will say, one of the things that I've learned after the last few years of doing this work is that this, however imperfect, was still an improvement over what was there before, which some of you might remember was a giant portrait of a white guy riding a horse. It was a Copley portrait of George IV, not even George III. So like really like nothing to do with the Americas, right? We learned this, and we kept making other changes. So for example, we replaced one of the portraits with an empty frame and a label asking who's missing. So where are the important Black historical figures like Crispus Attucks or Phyllis Wheatley? And we translated text for icons like Paul Revere's Liberty Bowl into multiple languages, not by using professional translators, but by drawing on the words and the talents of bilingual staff members and community members also. And we still knew that this wasn't enough. So in 2023, we began a series of convenings, including a formative retreat at the Lunder Institute for American Art at Colby, which was generously funded by the Terra Foundation. And throughout these convenings, we invited different thought partners, including professors, artists, activists, even teenagers, and we asked what experiences they hope to have in our 18th century galleries. And I think from these pictures, you can also get a sense of how large our curatorial team is. So I'm here today not only representing Ethan Lasser, our department chair who's leading the reinstallation project, but really curators and educators from across the MFA who are developing this project alongside us. From these conversations, so both internally and then also with our community partners, we've developed 8 new themes. And through these themes is how we'll present our important holdings of paintings, furniture, silver, textiles, and more. And so for the remainder of my time, I just want to give a very brief overview of all of the themes and then really kind of focus on one gallery to kind of give you a sense of our goals. So it's a little difficult, I know, to see on this plan. Oops, how do I go back? But the first thing that you'll see will be John Singleton Copley's Watson and the Shark. So immediately kind of placing you in thinking about the Americas in a more kind of international context. So here we have a painting that was made in London, a vision of Cuba by an artist from Boston. And then one of the first galleries that you enter will be dedicated to ideas about power and resistance in the colonial period. This space will consider 2 very different objects, a stoneware pot by the enslaved artist Dave, and Revere's Liberty Bowl. And these will both be presented as vessels that were inscribed and then created as acts of protest or a kind of resistance against authority. The next gallery, which includes Thomas Sully's monumental Passage of the Delaware, this would be the one object that we cannot move. This gallery will explore how artists establish histories as well as make myths. and even how some artists, like Fritz Scholder, appropriate heroic imagery as a form of national critique. Cultural exchanges, we would say both local and global, run throughout our galleries, and this is a main idea that we're describing as within the period a form of interdependence rather than an emphasis on independence. And these exchanges are perhaps most visible in these two galleries, one that's dedicated to Boston's connections to London, the Caribbean, and indigenous nations, and another that will focus on Asian influences in the early Americas. So the story of trade with Asia, well-trod territory, right, in American art. But at the MFA, we are uniquely positioned to be able to tell this story within both early US or colonial British American and also Latin American contexts. So this gallery will be anchored by a recent acquisition of a stunning 17-foot-long biombo, so a object that is inspired by Japanese and Chinese painted screens, but created in colonial Mexico. These narratives of international exchange, consumerism, and labor will also kind of guide our galleries that will be on tea, coffee, chocolate, and mate. And this will form a new context for Paul Revere's, for Copley's famous portrait of Paul Revere. And this portrait, we can now think about it in relation to our newly acquired portrait of a Mexican silversmith, Jose Maria Rodallega, in this incredibly rare painting by the academic painter Rafael Jimeno. And this work will be part of a gallery that examines known makers, workshops, collaborations, as well as artists whose names we no longer know. Finally, two galleries will expand upon rather than simply do away with existing themes. So this reinstallation was also a matter of identifying what from the 2010 installation should remain with us. And so in one gallery that is, we're calling Homes and Families. These, by the way, are all working titles, just so you know. And you're getting a little bit of, behind the scenes here. So this gallery that we're right now referring to as Homes and Families will diversify a space that's currently called At Home in the New Nation. And this is a gallery that has long focused on stories of women and children within a suite of galleries that otherwise could be perceived as largely only dedicated to stories about men. The new version of this gallery will include representations of domestic life across race and class differences. And then finally, our gallery on Copley will be the only space dedicated to a single artist, and it will examine the decisions that he made during a moment of intense political polarization, which may seem familiar to many of us. So turning briefly to Homes and Family, I just want to offer two examples of how we're using multiple approaches to activate these old American objects for today's audiences. This gallery is going to open with an installation by the Mashpee Wampanoag artist Hartman Dietz that is inspired by his home altar. So Dietz has chosen Native American objects from our collection, and he'll be bringing them into conversation with his own personal keepsakes and his own graphic designs. And this will kind of form a contemporary vision of a Wampanoag home that will be placed alongside a vision of a New England home, an early New England home, and also a New Spanish home. And within this context, we will have, this is one of the Hartman objects, the pot that you're seeing there on the left, created by master potter Ramona Peters, is actually his aunt, so we're able to have this very direct kind of family connection there. This way? The Costa paintings, so these will be also in the same gallery, so the space is kind of anchored by three different types of homes. And within the section about New Spain, here we'll encounter, these are our earliest images of families who are of mixed European, African, and indigenous heritage. Three of these paintings are in our permanent collection, the three that you're seeing now. And an additional group is on long-term loan from the Patricia Phelps de Cisneros collection. And the new gallery will bring them together in a single installation. Right now, they're sort of arbitrarily in two different spaces. We're working with designers to build in a dedicated space for extended interpretation of these works, which are incredibly powerful, but also incredibly complicated. And this interpretation will discuss them within their 18th century context, but also acknowledge how important these works are to some of our visitors, those of us who can see our own histories, our own families in these paintings. And I want to just close my remarks with a quick word about recent acquisitions that are not only shaping this reinstallation, but really transforming the entire MFA. So even as we seek to re-envision what 18th century art could look like, we're not leaving behind objects that were critical to the period of the American Revolution or that are unparalleled in terms of artistic accomplishment in the early United States. An exquisitely carved tea table and a silver tea caddy. This is one of only 9 that are known, 9 American tea caddies known to be created before the Revolution. These works attest to our commitment, our ongoing commitment to this areas of our collection. So we're not leaving this work behind. Instead, we're just showing that just as there were important art histories in colonial Philadelphia or colonial New York, that was also true in colonial Guadeloupe or Mexico City, where these remarkable portraits of 18th century women were created that you're seeing on the right. These works, I think, promise not only to shift how we think about the period or even how we think about a reinstallation like we're doing, but also how we just think about American art across time and across place, and that really includes our own. So thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over to Kathy.
This is so much fun, really. And we're doing this kind of in order here, but it's so interesting the way we're going to be building on top of each other, because you'll find that we're all interested in some of these same issues that you've just addressed, and we're actually all kind of trying to do the same thing. So I'm going to talk about the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and what we're trying to do, what we're going to open in the spring, is our American Galleries, the second chapter of our American Galleries from 1840 through the 1950s. So this is a major moment for us to complete the complete run of our American Galleries, but it's also a special exhibition that's going to be joining with the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts down the street in Philadelphia, and with the Middleton Family Collection, which was one of the greatest private collections in the country of American art, in order to do an extravaganza as a 3-way collaboration to celebrate the 250th birthday of the United States with this great sweeping story of American history, American art history between the 2 museums and with the added collection, Middleton Family Collection pieces. So both of us, both PAFA and the PMA, are undertaking major renovations. We're tearing out galleries, we're redoing everything from the ground up. So we are going to be opening these fresh galleries at the same time. It's also a birthday for both PAFA and PMA. We're both 150 years old. PMA was founded at the time of the centennial. PAFA's building, the fabulous Victorian Frank Furness building, was opened in 1876. So we have these birthdays layered in with the 250th birthday of the United States. Lots of celebrations going on here. So this is, I think, a whole lot of good stuff to celebrate. In addition to our renovations at the 2 museums, we are going to be salting into the installation 120 loan objects from the Middleton collection, about 60 at each institution. So these are, I'm showing you on the screen here, the great Thomas Moran of the Green River. That is one of the loans that we are bringing into the Philadelphia Museum of Art. So it's an odd combination thing of being a reinstallation of the collection and this 250th extravaganza, and it is complicated for that reason. PAFA and PMA have both very different installation strategies, and we're going to try to make it imperative that everyone in the room come to Philadelphia, because the 2 institutions are going to look very different. PAFA is doing a kind of chronological mix of old and new, side by side. PMA is organizing in a rather different way, and so I'm going to talk today about what our strategies are for this reinstallation. Here are the spaces, and any of you who've been to the PMA know that our American galleries are very scattered. We literally have historic rooms on the 3rd floor, and what opened in 2021 was the first galleries, that is our early American galleries from the 17th century to about 1840. Those opened 4 years ago, and now we're opening part 2, which is 1840 to 1960, that is basically continuing the story that we began downstairs. So a lot of the installation strategies and a lot of our thinking is going to, the themes literally that we developed for the 2021 installation are going to be carried through to make a through story on both floors. So the basic strategies are chronological. That is, we are telling the history, I don't know about what Ed said about Americans not knowing history. In all of our interviews with our visitors and so forth, Americans don't know history. They are really not sure when the Civil War was. They really aren't. And so we are being chronological, that's our basic story. And we are also integrating media. That is, we are showing painting and sculpture along with decorative arts, along with works on paper, along with costume and textiles, all of the media together. This is kind of the Philadelphia style. We've been doing this for the last 50 years since our first American galleries, our official American galleries opened in 1976. And so that creates a certain problem in museological terms because you've got works on paper that can't be out solid, 24/7. They have to keep changing. And, so it creates extra work for the museum. But our mode has always been to try to create a really three-dimensional sense of American material culture so that you have things that call out to one another or maybe are different from one another that are from the simultaneous moment. So chronological and then integrated media, those are two principles of the installation. The third principle is of integrated traditions. That is trying to put together fine art, folk art, popular art, commercial art, indigenous art, self-taught art, to integrate them all also. I think the pattern in the 20th century has been to have like the self-taught art over there and to have the glass over there. In other words, to sort the museum by either medium or by the sense of the context. The indigenous galleries certainly in a separate place from the Copley and West. So this idea of integrating has been one of the new principles of our installation, and I can see you doing this in Boston as well, and I think we saw this in the Brooklyn installations that have just gone up. This is, I think, the 21st century way to work, and so that's our third big principle. Now, looking at the objects that we have going, and can we make this change? Do you have to point it at the machine? There we go. Here are some of the objects in our very first gallery. This is the gallery that we originally called the Nation of Artists, and then suddenly Nation of Artists became the theme of the entire installation. But the concept of this first gallery was, number one, there is no single American art. There is no single story that is, you're either on the bus or you're not, and try to show that there's a simultaneity of different stories and that they are often interacting. Maybe they're existing in isolation, but maybe they are also in conversation with the other stories. And so that complexity is one of the things that I think we're all trying to attack right now in these installations. So number one, no single American artist, but also in this first gallery, the idea is artists are everywhere. American artists are everywhere. They're in your family. Her mother made that dress, okay? Her mother is an artist. Probably your grandmother makes things, maybe your grandfather putters in the garage. The idea that we wanted in this gallery was for people to come in and find something in this gallery that they could relate to from all the different corners. And so we are, as you might imagine, leaning into the idea of diversity, leaning into this notion of many different immigrant cultures, many different people coming from different ways of learning to be an artist. And so that's the subtext of this gallery, is how people learn to be artists. The idea here that you can see in this slide, we have South Carolina potters, formerly enslaved Black people making pottery in their spare time, having learned to make jugs and jars, making face vessels. In the upper corner, Pennsylvania, German carver. We are also leaning heavy into Pennsylvania, and I think actually all of our collections are very regional and are embracing that regional story. People come to Philadelphia and they want to see what's special about the arts in Philadelphia. And so we're not actually trying to be encyclopedic. I mean, I'm taking that back. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, anyway, so we are embracing the regional and making that part of our story. And then we have I'm gonna show you the next slide now because you'll see the carousel horse and you'll see the Winslow Homer, oops, in the elevation that we have. These galleries, of course, are not installed, so you have to see the kind of imaginary here. But what you see in this, the theme that unites the really diverse objects in this is the idea of the education of the artist and how each of these people learn to be an artist. How in the many pathways can we express that in this gallery? Now, that funny block that you see in the foreground, that white thing, that's the limits of the computer realization of these elevations. Those are actually two Acoma pots, Wanda Aragon and Francis Toribio, two late 20th century Acoma potters, Pueblo potters, a mother and a daughter. And the story that we are telling is twofold. Number one, downstairs in our first floor galleries, the first thing you see is the wampum belt from 1682 that was the great transfer, the great Magna Carta of Philadelphia, and paintings of Lenape chieftains. And likewise on the second floor, the first things we wanted you to see were Native American things to remind you of the first people. So right inside this gallery will be a mother-daughter pair of pots that talks about the matrilineal teaching tradition in Native American culture. So Frances taught her daughter, Wanda, and you can see the development between the two of them. So that's like one type of story. What else over the shoulder of Wanda and Frances is one of our most iconic Winslow Homers, the lifeline. Winslow Homer did not go to art school. He was apprenticed as a teenager to a lithography workshop in Boston and then learned on the job at Harper's. So this is an old story in American art, that people actually don't go to art schools. We don't have that many art schools. Many people learn on the job. Then over the shoulder, in addition, beyond the Native American pottery is a quilt made by a collective of women. This is home. These are the arts of the home. These are women teaching other women. And so we want to bring a lot of women artist stories as well as these domestic arts that are sometimes undervalued in a fine arts museum. And then in the center is that carousel horse. The carousel horse is by a German immigrant, Daniel Muller, who was a blue ribbon student at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts in sculpture, in the grand tradition of European sculpture, who goes to work for the Denzel Carousel Company, the greatest carousel company in the world. It sent its machines to Europe and around the globe. And what does Daniel Muller, the academically trained sculptor, do but revolutionize the popular art of carousel carving? So we have this sort of crossover story. So many different stories in this room. Then beyond the carousel horse, you can see a peek at a kind of a purple room in the distance. And there's that room. This is one of our vignettes, which we have several of them downstairs on the first floor. So we're continuing this pattern of having a kind of a taste of a period room without really being a period room, but with the idea, with the principle, and this is getting to the fourth principle of our installation, the idea of period taste, of installing things in a way that's friendly to the objects and to the makers, in the ways that these things will shine. Objects like this from the middle of the 19th century, Rococo and Gothic Revival, don't look really good on plain white walls. They want to have the texture, the activity of wallpaper, of carpeting with them, and to be seen in an ensemble so you understand the richness of the taste of this period. Well, so that's a principle, but also what's happening here is we're kicking into some of our themes. Like Boston, we have 8 themes. What's it with 8 themes? I don't know, we have 8 themes. Anyway, I don't know whether they're the same, but at any rate, one of our themes is the idea that you see here on the slide of abundance and inequity, the simultaneity of this fabulous ebullience of mid-19th century Rococo and Gothic Revival and the kind of parlor ambiance that you can see with these objects coexisting with the work of enslaved people like David Drake, our very famous African-American potter. And the harmony here is that Dave's jars, or something very like them, would probably be in the same house that upstairs, this is an upstairs, downstairs kind of a story, upstairs would have had the curly Rococo furniture. So his pot is from 1859, right on target with the Severin Rosen painting here, which is also from the 1850s, another Pennsylvania artist, I might say. Here's the abundance, here's the supernatural, florid quality of the 1850s in the impossible bouquet of Severin Rosen with the flowers from all seasons blooming simultaneously, that kind of richness that you get from this period simultaneously with the muscularity, with the austerity of Dave Drake. And so thinking about the coexistence of these two things maybe in the same household, and then how the economy of the United States was built on that basement, on the basement of enslaved labor. And so thinking about the wealth upstairs being thanks to the work of people like Dave Drake is a way to just provoke people with stories of American history. Well, fast forward, I'm not giving many details here there's many, many galleries, 19 galleries, but I'm gonna show you the period idea, because by the time we get to the 1950s, what we have is Museum of Modern Art kind of an installation with white walls, with Rothko, with the great abstract expressionist paintings and sculptures of the 50s. What's going to be continuous, though, if you've worked your way through these galleries, is the theme of immigration, of diversity of talent, of diversity of personal stories, because even in the 50s here, you have Mark Rothko, who was an immigrant as a child to the Pacific Northwest, Noguchi, whose father was Japanese, de Kooning, who came from Holland, Hoffman, who came from Germany, all of these people coming together to create a kind of explosion of creativity in New York in the 1950s. So some of these themes of diversity, of the artist's education, and then our other 8 themes, we're going to be threading them into the chronological story, into the story of mixed media, in order to give you as we're all trying to achieve, a more open story of American art. Onward to Chicago.
All right, thank you, Kathy. There's that. So I'm delighted to be here today, and it's really fascinating to be here today because, of course, Chicago is a very different city from Boston and Philadelphia and from New York. We're a much younger city. We were, dirt, and in 1776, excuse me, not in 1876. Sorry?
It was the Voyageurs.
Yes. But we are actually an old museum in a new city. So we were founded in 1879, and we've been collecting American art since that time, but we've always collected contemporary American art, and that has now become the basis of a pretty major historical collection. We also backfilled over many decades as well. But the moment, we actually are, like the MFA Boston, a hemispheric department of Arts of the Americas. And this is actually, for us, a new structure. We reorganized in 2020. So I should back up by saying I've been at the Art Institute for 23 years, and I joined when we were the Department of American Art. And in 2020, we sort of merged with Indigenous Art of the Americas to create our current structure. And as a result, we actually have a really significant time span. I think that's something we haven't really touched on, but the time span of our department covers 6,000 years from 4,000 BCE to the present day. And that's because although painting and sculpture, we collect loosely up to around 1950. With decorative arts and Indigenous Art of the Americas, we collect to the present day. So I think we're also just a more contemporary collection than the two of you, we'll say. More ancient and, yes. But, we have, that did not advance. There we go. I know, you want to point that way. But we have, really strong holdings of 19th and 20th century painting in the US. That includes a lot of really iconic works ranging from Cole and Homer to Sargent, American Gothic, Nighthawks, and so on. But we also have things that I think, like Kathy has talked about, that are regionally specific. So we have extraordinary holdings in Chicago art and design, from the decorative arts, Frank Lloyd Wright, the Prairie School, et cetera, but as well painters such as Archibald Motley and Gertrude Abercrombie, who are now actually making a national appearance after decades of sort of being in this Chicago context. And so for 2 decades, I've really been focused on, with my colleagues, and now as department head, with building the collection in ways that understand our strengths and really try to push against the canon. I mean, I think this is something we can all speak to. If you have really canonical works of art, you can do a lot to actually expand the boundaries of what that canon is. And I think especially in Chicago, where we're maybe a little freer sometimes in that way. So we've been collecting, for example, women artists for decades. We've been collecting Black artists, and particularly Chicago's Black artists, for decades. And I've certainly tried to do that as well. That was something when I arrived in Chicago, I had never seen any of these works ever taught. And that was important for me to sort of realize there was this entire art world that was not present in surveys, wasn't present, in the histories of American art at that time. But I will say we are, to go back to the indigenous collection, a very idiosyncratic collection, particularly for indigenous arts of the Americas, because in fact the greatest strength of our holding is South American, and specifically Andean. So we have about 1,200 works of Nazca and Moche ceramics, for example, largely ceramics, largely archaeological objects. But we do not, in fact, have strong native North American collection. If you look at just the numbers, when we restructured in 2020, we had these 1,200 South American works. We had 160 works of native North American art. And that is despite the fact that Chicago has, in fact, one of the largest urban native populations in the United States. So this is where we set the goal, knowing this fact, set the goal of really trying to, in the last 5 years, build the native North American collection, and specifically looking at where we could have the greatest impact, which is contemporary art, and working directly with artists, because again, this is what the Art Institute has been doing for 150 years. So we often are looking for, we're looking for works that often are in dialogue with historic traditions. Actually, the subject of family lineage is one that we are thinking about a lot as well. But we also want very much to expand into new aesthetics and new ideas. And so I'm showing you works here by Jeremy Frey. We also had an exhibition by Frey, thank you, Ramy, last year, but also Rhonda Holybear, Jared So, who's an incredible young ceramicist. And so we've actually doubled the collection, which admittedly, when you start from 160, doesn't take a lot of work, but in only a few short years, I feel like we've had a good impact. And again, building relationships with all of the artists that we're collecting through fairs, through inviting them to the Art Institute to speak. They've done a lot of commissioned work with us, we're compensating them. But we're also always trying to think about the other parts of the collection. So this is where we are equally building the collection in response to the Andean collection. This is an incredible work by Ana de Orbegoso that is essentially called What Do We Do With Our History, which is looking at the history of Moche ceramics. So having said all that, what we hadn't been doing in this last several years was really have the galleries reflect our new thinking. We have done, in fact, phased reinstallations, but until this July, we had a single gallery for indigenous art, which in the middle photo, there's a tiny green square that you probably can't see. And that was our former gallery for indigenous art. And so we're now turning to reinstalling, having done sort of several phases already, smaller scale reinstallations. We're now planning the reinstallation of over 40,000 square feet. So I'm not going to walk you through all of the themes. I'll walk you through some of the ones that we've already completed. But in general, I would say we're taking a sort of loosely chronothematic approach. We don't, like all of my colleagues here, we're not interested in telling a singular teleological story of American art. We are looking to tell multiple stories. I often use the term messiness because I think there's something really productive in the messiness, and to think about American or Arts of the Americas as a layered set of stories that sometimes overlap, sometimes not. And so we are very much interested in a both-and model, where we have some galleries that will be more integrative. We always, from the history of the founding of the Department of American Art, we've always actually had many media. We've always been painting, sculpture, decorative arts. We've always had textiles on view, that sort of thing. And so we'll continue that model of integrating in many of our galleries. But we also very much want to, and will have, specific galleries that can tell narrower stories. So for example, we're planning a gallery that will really feature as its focus a sort of constant rotation of contemporary Native American works that we're acquiring. So a space to show new acquisitions, for example. We certainly are thinking about the archaeological collections as having a space that should be dedicated. And then because we're in Chicago, we are thinking about a space that is sort of the Chicago story as something that can bring together a lot of these different narratives. But I'll now turn to some actual photos. And this is actually one gallery. This is sort of our introductory gallery, such as it is, in our wing. And this is a space where we actually very deliberately really just threw away the idea of chronology. We didn't want to be chronologically specific. We wanted to tell, give a gallery that showed to our visitors, anybody who walked in, that they would experience a broad cross-section of Arts of the Americas throughout the space. So we wanted to introduce that breadth and give them a sense of the variety. And so we do, though, focus the theme around storytelling, something that has come up a lot today, and specifically sort of the idea of who gets to tell a story, who gets to be commemorated. This feels very appropriate. How that has been done in the past. So opening with 3 bronzes of iconic and mythically important figures, such as Lincoln in Illinois, always very important, but the Puritan, a Bronco buster, and then moving out from there to, and there's many different examples, but thinking about the ways that everyday people started becoming visible in sculpture. This is an area with very high light levels, so we do tend to keep it focused on sculpture. But, sort of the everyday people, from a Bessie Potter Vano to Emma Stebbins to Richmond Barthet. And then the work that actually has always, in the last 2 years, been drawing a lot of attention is the snowboard, which most people don't expect a snowboard to be on view in a museum. And that's by the Tlingit artist James Johnson, and it's actually telling the story of Raven. So this is a storytelling object that happens to also be a snowboard that reflects the fact that many Native artists work both in the fine arts and with commercial interests. But that, moving onwards, other galleries are more temporally constrained. And I'm going to focus more on the modernist galleries because that's where we've done most of our work already. And this is a gallery that we call the Contested Modernisms Gallery. And I think this is a great example of how, in some ways, we took a constraint, which is this gallery, this specific donor name gallery, has to have Stieglitz circle works on view. It has to have 10 O'Keeffes on view at all times, which luckily we can do. I'm very fortunate. But we didn't want it to be just the sort of altar to high modernism that would imply. And so we decided to expand it to this idea of contested modernisms as a way of bringing in other narratives and how there were other voices for modernism in this moment. And I should say there's multiple modernist galleries, so we're not even telling a single modernist story. But for example, we look at the dealer Edith Halpert, who was so instrumental in promoting immigrant artists. Immigration is also a through line throughout all of our galleries. So she sold us, you can barely tell this, but there's a Yasuo Kuniyoshi painting there next to a peacock weather vane. Both of those came through Halpert to the Art Institute in the 1940s. She was equally the champion of folk art. And then as well was O'Keeffe's dealer in the 1950s. So she's a figure that sort of connects a lot of different narratives for us in a way that we really appreciated, that we could tell a story about immigration, we could tell a story about folk art and bring in folk art into different spaces that might be somewhat unexpected. And then, oops, I'm glad that didn't change, because the other photo is showing us how we think about something like the decorative arts in this context. So that's a case of ceramics by a number of different innovative ceramic makers that include the Knotzlers, Maya Grotel, but also Julian and Maria Martinez, whose work is represented in the collection. And this is actually a case where we've also acquired works by Martinez's great-great-grandson. So we worked with him on the installation to have sort of discussions with him about this display. And then, there we go. And then this is just another of our modernist galleries, which we call Modernism's Reimagined, sort of looking at how artists were turning towards the imaginary at this moment, or thinking about different futures through the visual arts, whether that might be positive or negative. And here we anchored it with Nighthawks, which is the painting that everybody goes to visit. And this is a painting that people think they know. They think they know exactly what it's about. And so I wanted to tweak that a bit. So I've put it between a Huey Lee Smith on the right there, which is a very sort of surreal landscape by an underknown black artist, if you ask me. And then on the left is a Gertrude Abercrombie painting. And so the surrealism, she's a Chicagoan again, the surrealism of those two paintings help sort of make Nighthawks a little strange, which I think is beneficial. But as well, Nighthawks helps people look at the other paintings. So it's like moths to the flame, get them to look at other things, which it actually does very successfully do, incidentally. We do a lot of watching of people. But we also look at the turn to abstraction, early paintings by Pollock and Norman Lewis that are in the collection, along with Toshiko Takiezu, the extraordinary Japanese-American ceramicist, with their incredibly lyrical form and glaze work. And then opposite is a tiny gem of a work. It's a 2018 black ash basket by the 5th generation Potawatomi basket weaver Kelly Church. And it's like a little Fabergé egg almost. And this is where, again, we discussed this with her extensively, how we wanted to present this. Because this is, and I think we'll talk about this, this was not something where we wanted this work to be an intervention. We wanted this to be a work that fit the theme of the gallery, even though it's a little bit later and much more contemporary. And we all felt exactly that it would do that. If this is a gallery about an imagined or problematic future, this is a basket about the decimation of the black ash trees by the emerald ash borers. And it actually contains a flash drive that records how to make these baskets, should that knowledge be lost. And so she's entrusted us with updating the format every several years to sort of make sure that the knowledge is retained for future people who might want to make baskets. So it's very much about an imagined future, one where she has taken steps to try to preserve culture and history. So in the last 2 seconds of what I will talk about, I swear, Sylvia, I just wanted to show you a small gallery that we use for temporary exhibitions or rotations, often of new acquisitions, but also of new ways of creating interpretation. And we test out ideas here, we do visitor research, we have conversations with visitors, and it helps us make some of our future plans. So this is an installation that our curator Andrew worked on with the artist Rhonda Holybear. And what was interesting here is that we actually tested out or sort of developed with Rhonda a glossary of Lakota terms about the making and the sort of techniques that she used. She is making these incredibly elaborate beaded forms, beaded sculptures. And so that's something where they really very much wanted to showcase in Lakota language sort of all the different techniques and ideas. And this is something that we now just do routinely. We're sort of, with every new work that we acquire, we're having interviews with artists, regardless, every work by a living artist. We're having interviews. We often then commission from them didactic material or essays, things to use in the galleries or on the website or in collection catalogs. And I'll just close with this last view, which is by our curatorial fellow in Native American art, Lois, who became very fascinated with how Kay Walking Stick, which is the painting on the left there in the photo, Kay Walking Stick tried to go meet Georgia O'Keeffe in the 1980s and did not succeed, but Lois sort of spun that out into a gallery that she thought about these landscapes in a conversation that might not have happened, but yet was very real in how Kay Walking Stick was thinking about the historical past and everything from language and form and abstraction. So I'll end there and turn it over to Sylvia. So thank you all.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you all. It's thrilling to hear about these really meaningful reinstallations, and having just completed our own in the American Wing, though of course very much a work in progress always, as all of our work is. We have a lot to share, but we have just about like 8 minutes to do it. Wow. So I'm going to just focus on a couple. We had a number of questions and points we were going to discuss, but a few of you had referenced and gestured toward institutional histories and departmental evolutions, but I'm really interested in the fact that we're all stewarding very valued and much deeply loved by generations of visitors, these historical collections that really predate our tenures by, over a century in some instances. So how are you thinking? What is your sense of curatorial responsibility to the past in terms of these materials? And then kind of the inverse of that, how responsive do you feel like you need to be to the current moment in your work? We could start with that. That could go on for 30 minutes.
I'll jump in quickly with just a quick response, which is something that Ethan shares a lot, which is that our job is to keep the voices of these artists alive. And I think about something like the Liberty Bowl, right? You couldn't have a more sort of storied object or one that is more closely tied to the beginnings of the US. That was an illegal object when it was made. If anybody, any of those names that are engraved, they would have been tried for treason. And it may look like it sits obediently in a museum case now, but it's actually like our job to bring a kind of radical politics to that. And that is not just something of our day, that's also what is true to the context of the object.
Brings it both together beautifully, yeah. Kathy? Yeah.
This is such a good question because it totally is the paradox of the job that we have. One of my areas of expertise is Thomas Eakins, and I'm very, very powerfully dedicated to kind of telling the story of Eakins and explaining his pictures to the world and thinking about going forward. Do people want to know this? I mean, do they care about this? And what's interesting is that in the last 30 years, theoretically, has come into art appreciation and criticism. The notion of how the viewer completes the work of art. And it's one of the things that makes a great work of art great, is that generation to generation, viewers continue to find interesting stories that may or may not be actually on point to what the artist originally intended. But you bring your experience to the object. Maybe it reminds you of your grandmother. Maybe it reminds you of a trauma that you survived. In other words, each viewer is going to come with a whole different set of experiences that effectively complete that artwork. And so thinking about that new kind of theoretical way of thinking about the audience and what are they bringing to the galleries, that has really changed my way of installing. I don't think of myself as being the all-seeing, all-knowing expert. I think we've all been trying to get away from the godlike voice of the curator or the museum director intoning on the audio guide. We want to recognize that the viewer is going to come with very different preparation, with different emotional responses. And so to me, that's like the thing that's different now, is sharing my expertise with a recognition that the viewer is also going to be bringing personal experiences.
Great, yeah. And I think, I'll just add to that because all of us have audiences that are extremely diverse. And in Chicago, we are based on tourist audiences, and they are going to come look at Nighthawks and American Gothic and the Georgia O'Keeffes. And I think that there's that aspect of it where I feel a responsibility to ensure that they feels, welcomed and supported in what they're seeing at the Art Institute. But our daily visitor is from Chicago. We have really tremendously diverse audiences. Chicago, one of our major clients, will say, is the Chicago public school system, the Chicago public library system. We have major partnerships with them. And so even as I feel responsible to tourists, I feel much more responsibility to the Chicagoans who might come day in and day out, and making them feel welcome at the museum. And I'm constantly aware of how we're not, in fact, living up to that yet. I think that was very poignant, what you were saying about that, and how we still have so much work to do. But then I also feel reassured about the fact that I am in a lineage of 150 years of curators. And that means that my work can be this moment, and then it will just build on in the future, and hopefully in positive ways, where they won't look at what I've acquired and think, well, that's being deaccessioned, So I think you always have this balancing act between responsibility to different audiences and giving them the support to find something in the gallery to interest them or intrigue them.
Yes, please.
Another note that we talked about before was the role of the community and community voices. And I think all of us, everybody on the stage right here, has in their lifetime as a curator gone from just internally working on your labels and your interpretive plan to reaching out to advisory groups. For my new installation, there are 5 different advisory groups. And they range from an indigenous, people representing the indigenous objects, to the school teachers of Philadelphia. I'm totally here to second your point about the regional responsibility, because we are powerfully related to the Philadelphia neighborhoods. But thinking about what do communities want, and listening to what they want to see, listening to our indigenous experts, and how would they like their work presented. They are helping us write the labels. They are helping us choose the objects that we put on view as to the things they think that are the best and the most important. And we didn't do that. We didn't do that when I was a young curator.
Yeah. So broadening the definition of expertise, and I think that's happening internally too at museums, right? It's not just about our bringing in outside colleagues, but working across a very big museum with people of a lot of different talents, digital, design, education. That's become much more the key effort, I would say, in museums today than when we started maybe in the field.
Yeah, this is maybe a slight tangent from galleries, but we're republishing and rethinking our entire collection highlights catalog, which is our biggest seller.
You're going through that process too
And
right now, actually.
we have gone, our department has 35, 40 objects in it, and we have 40 different authors, and they are from outside. We asked our interpretive team to write, we asked our educators to write, we asked a lot of artists to write, and so it is a sea change that's a really welcome one.
Yeah.
And they're very different. They're very different essays as a result.
Lila, do you want to add anything? I have one last point I wanted to raise, but before
no, why don't we move to the next question?
Well, yes, we wanted to just set up this last question for the person who's joining us next on stage, and that is very much the dialogues between historical and contemporary art that, as you know, as museum visitors and colleagues, have become very de rigueur in museum exhibitions and special exhibition and collection galleries, particularly in the field of American art, and I would say historical American art. So how do you feel about this kind of expanding process, this practice, and how do you feel like it's best approached?
Yeah, I love this question because I think similarly to what we were just discussing about how there's been a sea change in terms of expertise, how we think about knowledge, and I think it's helpful to just think about how much indigenous artists and knowledge keepers have helped us think about that, because specifically within that field, so much of what is published, so much of what has passed as research is not coming from the communities themselves. And so if you work with that material, you really have to redefine how you are doing research in the first place. And it's interesting to see how those methods can then shape non-native art as well. And so in the same way that now we would not write a label, right, about Jeremy Frey or any of these artists without consulting the artists, I think the contemporary interventions have become way more thoughtful than they were maybe even just 5 years ago, when it would really be about having a contemporary artist sort of solve a problem for you, right? So you would have like a work by Kara Walker that was supposed to bear the burden of the entire histories of slavery and racism, like in the United States.
The redress.
That's right. And Sarah, you pointed out like very helpfully that like we're not thinking of the Kelly Church as something like an intervention. Instead, it's much more about how certain works can be in dialogue, I think with both the past and the future, her work being such a beautiful example of that specifically. We talk about in our department, you know, we really only want the contemporary artists who already want to be there, like to be part of these installations, who are already sort of actively in dialogue with art of the past. And in that way, it becomes a way of engaging audiences differently and also sort of opening up these objects of the past rather than just trying to reconcile a problem of the past.
I think that is the final word. Not the final word, but thank you all very much. Thank you. No, Kathy, one more word.
I have one more thing to say, and
Okay.
that is the three of us are here on the stage, but really the mother of us all is right here. And this is the end of the centennial anniversary of the
Many of our
American
colleagues in
galleries.
the
The
audience,
Met is, you know, the flagship American collection, and we bow down to your reinstallation, and thank you.
Well,
and
thank
I know
you.
your curators, many of them are here, so thanks for the good work. What a fabulous
And continuing to work
fabulous
together,
thing.
obviously,
Yes.
as we go home on
Thank
these
you
great
so much.
projects. So thank you. So again, thank you to our three wonderful colleagues, Layla, Kathy, and Sarah. And now we're very happily ceding the stage to an acclaimed contemporary artist who has thought deeply about many of these issues we've been discussing today, especially the critical necessity of the past, present, and future dialogues around museum collections, art history, and broader visual culture. And that is Titus Kaphar, who many of you know and admire, I know. And we're thrilled you're here today to have this experience with him. He is an artist whose paintings, sculptures, and installations examine the history of representation by transforming its styles and mediums with formal innovations to emphasize the physicality and dimensionality of the canvas and the artistic materials themselves. He is also a talented filmmaker whose 2024 debut feature, Exhibiting Forgiveness, received critical acclaim for its, quote, quiet power, and you can find it now streaming on Netflix. If you have not watched it, I would highly encourage you to do that. As Kaphar's bio states, his practice seeks to dislodge history from the past in order to unearth its contemporary relevance. He cuts, crumples, shrouds, shreds, stitches, tars, twists, binds, erases, breaks, tears, and turns the paintings and sculptures he creates, reconfiguring them into works that reveal unspoken truths about the nature of history. In so doing, Kaphar's aim is to uncover something of what has been lost and to investigate the power of a rewritten history. Kaphar lives and works in New Haven, Connecticut, where his commitment to social engagement and education has led him to establish Next Haven, a new national arts model that empowers emerging artists and curators of color by way of education and access. Through intergenerational mentorship, professional development, and cross-sector collaboration, Next Haven accelerates careers in the arts and encourages the expansion of New Haven's growing creative community. So I am very pleased to welcome Titus Kaphar to the stage.
I can see nobody. This is terrible. Y'all did this? Man, this makes it so difficult. I feel like I'm talking to myself. Let's see what we can do in light of being able to see absolutely nothing at all. Okay. Hi, everybody. Yeah. Can we turn up the lights a little bit? Okay. Hi. So I don't usually like to stand behind these things. I like to move around because it makes me nervous. to stand in one place. But maybe at some point I could get a microphone or something that I can hold so I can move a little bit, if somebody's cool with that. My name is Titus Gafar. I'm a painter, a sculptor, and apparently I make films too. That happened. I love museums. I don't think I'm the person that should love museums. By that I mean, sometimes it feels like I don't see much of myself reflected in those spaces, but I'm a painter at heart, man. And you put me in front of a Velázquez painting and I am in heaven. And there's a couple paintings that look a little bit like me, so like I can get into that. I think we are in a very challenging moment right now. Can we all just like, it's challenging. Whatever side you're sitting on, it's a little challenging right now. I read this quote by Mark Strand. It says, "The artist's task is to bear witness." You know, that's a different task from what the politician's task is necessarily. But I feel like for me, this is an important mantra as I think about what's happening in the world right now and how I specifically want to engage with it. So, how many of you know my work? Whoa! Thank you. I'm used to doing that and it being like one person. And I'm like, okay, then let me give you a whole bunch of backstory. Well, y'all already know, so I don't need to be here apparently. So my project really starts with art history. A lot of artists get into this by drawing and painting, and you know, from the time they're a little kid, they really, really want to be an artist. I didn't meet a professional artist until I was in graduate school. That was the first time I met. That is someone who makes their living truly by selling their artwork. So people ask me all the time, did you ever dream that this would be your future? No, I didn't know this existed as a possibility. Now I want to come back to that idea of possibility in a little bit. So as I said, this started with art history for me. I was in a undergrad class, a junior college class actually, in San Jose, California, De Anza College. Anybody know De Anza College? Yeah. Wow, this is great. Okay, we're getting some responses. I'm feeling good. I can almost see you now. So I was at De Anza College, and I don't have a whole lot of time today, so I'm not going to get into the wonderful story of how I met my wife and her inspiration to get me into this school and all that that was. But what I will say is I didn't do very well in high school, and I had never had any intention of going to college. I, my friends, was going to be a rock star. That's what I was. I don't know why you're laughing. I do not know why you're laughing. That is what was going to happen. But because I guess I'm getting into the story a little bit, I did want to have this date with this extraordinary woman. I pretended like I was interested in college and ran down to the junior college, registered for some classes, and ended up taking an art history class completely by accident, and only stayed there because she was really cute. She's still really cute, actually, if you ask me. And so I'm in that class, and as I say, for the first time in my life, my visual intelligence was required of me. I had failed most of my classes in high school, literally failed. They let me out because they didn't want to see me anymore, not because I had done the work. We can talk about that later, too. But when I was in this class, this art history class, they were showing these images. And I was required to understand this information based on the aesthetics of the image. And somehow my brain just works that way. My brain likes that. But I'm in my 20s at this point, and no one has ever asked me that before. So I take this class, and I end up getting a B in this class. That is a revolution in my mind. And it's a revolution in my mind because the first time I believed maybe I'm not stupid. Now, I want to say it as harshly as that because I'm not being hyperbolic here. And the thing is, when you believe that you're stupid, it actually diminishes your intelligence. If you believe that about yourself, if you walk through the world in that way. I keep highlighting certain pieces of this because at the end of this talk, I'm going to talk about the young people that I work with and why I'm so committed to that work. Okay, so when I finally got to San Jose State and took that first art history class at San Jose State, we took a survey art history class. We've all had that survey art history class, way too much information in a short period of time. But in that class, we ended up having a chapter, supposed to have a chapter on Black people in the history of painting. But when I got to class that day, the professor decided to skip over it. And when I asked about it, the professor said, we don't have time to go through this. I said, well, when are we gonna go through it? She said, we are not going to go through it. So, people skip over chapters all the time. But for me, this was critically important. This was the first time something that reflected my personal story was in that textbook. It was really important to me. So I went to the dean. The dean told me he could do nothing about it. Went to her office hours. That led to nothing. But this began my practice. This search for where I fit in, where I'm supposed to be in all of this. I realized later that if I had accepted what she was saying, what she was implying about skipping over that chapter, I would have had to accept a diminished understanding of what my community has offered to the art world. I couldn't do that. And so I dug in and I started making these paintings based on the paintings that were inside of that art history book. I repainted every single Black figure in that little tiny section, and I painted them exactly the same size within the same compositional space as the original paintings, all on dry erase whiteboard, because that was what was in front of us in the classroom. That was how information was disseminated to us through this board. Here's the thing you need to know about this teacher. She was great. She was really, really good. Anytime we got to a particular artist, she had all of the back information on the artist. Everything that you wanted to know about that particular person, about their life, about their family, all of that. I was excited to be in that class. That's the reason why I was heartbroken when we got to this chapter. Not because she wasn't good at what she did, but because she was great at what she did. The problem was she was ashamed to go tell someone, I was not taught this information. I don't know this information. She could have easily gone to the African American Studies department, which is where I went to try to figure out the stuff that I didn't know, and said, hey, Professor Jones, can you come please co-teach this class with me, this section with me, because I don't know it. So I want to be a little bit more casual about this. I'm sorry, it's just me. If I say something and you have a strong voice, like shout it out and I'll respond. You're not gonna throw me off. Don't worry about it. Because I feel much better on stage if I feel like I'm in dialogue with people than if I feel like I'm talking to myself up here. Sure, yeah, that'd be great. Say that again. Do you want us to affirm when we hear something that resonates? Hello? You mean like call and response? See, I grew up in the Black church, so that's all I know. So yes, wait, did somebody tell you had to be quiet or something? Is that what this? I'm not an art historian, I'm an artist, so like, no, please, that would be great. It would make me feel really good. I'd feel less alone up here. Yeah, we still want to see the screen. So my whole practice started there. Started with being ignored. The things that I cared about, the things that meant something to me, being absolutely positively disregarded. And so this has become particularly important in this moment. I think the scary thing for me, and I probably for most people here, is how much progress was made and then how much regress has happened. But we're historians here, right? Y'all are, not me. But isn't this what always happens? Like if we're honest about what has gone on in this country, we progress and we regress and we progress and we regress. I believe art is one of the greatest forms of hope. And in moments like this, hope is an act of resistance. Hope is an act of resistance. We have to continue hoping. So I found myself back into this body of work again, thinking about the people who have been erased It's important for us to remember this history, not because we want people to feel bad, but because, oh, there's this great Baldwin quote. Who likes Baldwin in here? Anybody like Baldwin? I love this man. Whoever cannot tell himself the truth about his past is trapped in it. And here's the key part. Whoever cannot tell himself the truth about the past is trapped in it, immobilized in the prison of his undiscovered self. Immobilized in the prison of his undiscovered self. We have to be honest about what has happened in the past, not because we're trying to make people feel guilty, but so that we can have the moral progress that we want, so that we can recognize the harm that was done, so we don't do that again. So in these kinds of paintings, what I'm talking about often is just this erasure of the history that we have uncovered, discovered, and now want to present back. But it is so easy for that stuff to be taken away, for that stuff to be disappeared. James Armistead Lafayette, that's this man here. We all know James Armistead Lafayette, a very important spy for the American Revolution under George Washington, went behind enemy lines, got information back, and told George Washington and the rest of the team, like, what was going on. This is American history. These are American stories. This is not some woke history. This is the history of this country. We need these stories. Thank you. Somebody talking back. Thank you. Appreciate that. Christopher Shield, another one. Worked under George Washington, born at Mount Vernon, stayed enslaved by George Washington his entire life. Found this wonderful enslaved woman on another plantation, wanted to marry her. First George says yes. Turns out this enslaved woman can read. They had this whole plot to escape. George found out and said, no, you can't marry her. And he spent the rest of his life in service to George Washington for the rest of his life. These are stories, these are our stories, not just mine. I think sometimes when we divide these things up by like African American history and so on and so forth, we forget that history belongs to all of us, and it's important for all of us to understand, to know that history. That's ours. I showed this picture specifically because someone in the administration was saying that they didn't want to see this picture anymore. Nobody wants to see this picture. This has nothing to do with us wanting to see this picture. We don't want to forget. We don't want to forget. That's the necessity of these kinds of images. That's what makes the museum so important. You all collectively bring together the past, what we were, who we want to become. You bring that all together in the same space. I want to say one more thing about that. I'm not going to go back to that image. I jumped forward because I don't want to sit with it a long time, but I also don't want us to forget. But I want to say this, and this goes back to Baldwin's quote. Our failure, this is not Baldwin, this is me. Let's make that clear. America's failure to face history paralyzes its moral development. We repeat our mistakes again and again and again. Let me say that one more time. Our failure to face history paralyzes our moral development. We actually forget about the good things that we've done. Like the reason that we can be proud is because we have come out of these things. But when we are not clear about that past, we forget all of that stuff has ever happened. We go into museums and we see this, right? We see paintings like this. I'm in a moment right now where I'm trying to talk about what's behind the thing. We know what these kinds of paintings mean, right? art historians, you've never seen this painting before, right? Man, y'all are not doing this talkback thing very well at all. Wow, okay, let's try that again. Art historians, you've never seen this painting before, right? Right, good. So, I want you to tell me, just based on the composition, what you can ascertain about this character just based on the composition. Tell me some stuff. Privilege, yes, excellent. Landowner, excellent. Keep going. 18th century, excellent. Keep going. Educated, keep going. Ooh. Okay. I've been trying to find a way to talk about what's behind all of that. Because all of those words are covering some other things. And so I started making these paintings that I think of as these kind of Trojan horses of truth. So literally, it's a painting with a door behind it where you don't see it. You walk up to the painting and it just looks like a normal painting on the wall. But then someone, and I don't know what museum is going to allow the museum goers to do this, but I'm working on it. Someone walks up to that painting and can pull out this painting from the back. What's hidden behind? Then we can actually have a conversation about why these images are here. Let me say this also. I am not one of the artists that's saying that all of this stuff should go away. I know a lot of my colleagues thinks all of this stuff should be taken down. I don't actually believe that. I'm happy to have the conversation with anyone who wants to have the conversation. I'm interested in the other paintings existing in those same spaces doing battle with these paintings. I'm not afraid of this work. I'm not afraid of the monuments. They don't scare me. They don't hurt my feelings. I've dealt with a lot worse in my life. I want them off the pedestal, but I want contemporary artists to be commissioned to do more work that actually rejects those ideas, as I said, does battle with those ideas. So we go back to the beginning and we start here with a painting in front of us, and then we begin to understand, we begin to think about what's behind that painting, and we get a little bit more of the story. Somebody said wealth, somebody said potential slave owner, somebody said landowner, but the story is even more complicated than that, right? That's all of our history, right? So, I made this painting, and I would be in Switzerland someplace if I had just decided to only make this painting for the rest of my career. I have been asked to remake this painting no less than 12 times. And currently, oh, that's right, Janine's here. The gallery's here too. Sorry, I should watch what I say. No, but it's fascinating to me because in my mind, this painting evolved out of a struggle that I was having. It wasn't because I was trying to go back through American history and mine it for something in particular. I have a regular conversation with this woman who is 80 years old. And on Sundays, it used to be Sundays, we would have our conversation. I would go over and talk to her. She is a lovely human being, but we share none of the same political beliefs at all. None. Not at all. None. Did I say none? None. But I'm a person who likes talking to people who believe differently than me. I believe that's the only way that we can actually reconcile, that we can actually make progress. And so, regularly on Sundays, I would go to her house, we'd sit down, we'd have a conversation. One of these Sundays, I'm sitting at her kitchen table and we're talking. Somehow we get on the conversation of Thomas Jefferson. I love talking about Thomas Jefferson. I've read a lot about Thomas Jefferson. I find him absolutely fascinating. And in that conversation, she says to me something I'll never forget. She says, yes, but Thomas Jefferson was a benevolent slave owner. And I said, I don't know what that means. Can you help me understand what that means? I mean, I understand those two words separately, obviously, but when you put those things together, I don't know what it means. And I actually think it's kind of dangerous, that concept. So help me, please. So I sat in front of her. The clock was behind her, And it just went around, and she said nothing. I got up from the table, gave her a hug, kissed, walked out the door, said, I'll see you next week. The scary thing about this story is for 40 years, she taught American history. So there are people walking around who believe that this concept, this idea of benevolent slave ownership is the thing that should be embraced. Is it any surprise that we are so divided? We're actually learning different histories. We're learning different histories. Okay, one of the things that makes me most proud in the world is that my children are not embarrassed of me. I mean, I got a couple paintings at the Metropolitan, that's cool, but my children are not embarrassed of me. So I don't know. I mean, maybe, I don't know. So my kids are in junior high at the time. They're not now. My oldest son is in college at Howard. My HU. Their teacher comes to me and says, Titus, we know your work. We're studying American history. It would be lovely if you came and gave a talk about your work. I said, nah. Nah, not the kids. Nah, I'm good. So I went home. I told my wife and kids, hey, teacher asked me to give a talk at school today. And my sons were like, Dad, you have to do it. I said, wait, what, you want me to do it? Yeah, you have to do it. So I said, okay, revamp. I went back to the teacher and said, okay, I will do this. Now, I thought that I was going to be talking to, I think it was like 7th, 8th grade at the time. I thought I was going to be talking to that group. I was talking to the whole school. What that means is I have kindergartners and I have 8th graders. Oh my God. So I'm doing the presentation. I get to this painting and I start talking about Thomas Jefferson. And this painting is called Behind the Myth of Benevolence. Based on that situation, that conversation, I went back to the studio and I started working. This is what emerged. I got to this painting and I was talking about the fact that Thomas Jefferson enslaved his own children. There was this adorable little white girl sitting in front of me, blonde, blue eyes, and she looked up at me and she goes, what? And I was like, dear God, please tell me this is not the first time somebody is having this conversation with her. I got upset. In that moment, to all of the teachers, I said, this is not my responsibility. It's not my job to tell her this. This should not be the first time she is having this conversation. If you've told her about Thomas Jefferson, then these things kind of have to be integrated. But what's happening is we're preferring to tell a different kind of history. And so people walk around thinking things that are just factually not true. For the record, if any of you want me to give a talk at an elementary school, it's never happening again. So these situations keep happening to me. It's my experience in the world. It's not a desire to make these political statements. The situation with the woman who will not be named, that happened to me, and I went to the studio. When I'm struggling with something, I go to the studio and I make a painting. That's kind of how I process information, is through the process of making painting. People saw this painting years ago, and I'll be quick, they thought that this was about Black Lives Matter, and it's fine if that's how people want to use it as a banner for that. That's great, but that's not what it's about. It's about me and my brother being stopped by the police in Chelsea, being accused of stealing artwork out of galleries because we were walking around just looking at art. Chelsea, here, New York, liberal New York, me and my brother are put up against the wall. Police officers pull guns on us because we are accused of stealing artwork out of galleries. That's my lived experience. Now, the reality is, this stop and frisk thing, stopping citizens just because they look like a particular thing, is not new. And we're doing it again right now, and we're expanding who is allowed to be stopped under those circumstances. If I'm making some people feel uncomfortable, I'm not sorry. I'm not. I was about to lie to you. But my grandmother's voice said, boy, don't do that. Don't do that. So again, these things, these experiences, the Jerome Project. I started this project, and as I'm starting this project, we are having a national conversation about the criminal justice system. Fantastic. I'm having a conversation about my relationship to my father and his experience in the criminal justice system. And how do I make my way back to him? How do I create a relationship that is not toxic so that I don't pass that on to my children? The things that I was struggling with, I don't want to give that to them. I don't want them to experience that. So after years of having not seen my father, I went back to Michigan to run into him, and I was absolutely shocked because he was a completely different person than I had ever remembered. All of the things that I had told myself, the speech that I had written in my head to deliver to him, didn't make sense anymore. And so, when I'm confused about a thing, what do? I go to the studio and I start painting. So I started painting my father's mugshot, but when I Googled my father and found his mugshot, I found 97 other black men with exactly the same first and last name in all of their mugshots. And I started painting them. And I began to realize that it had nothing to do with my father's name. It had more to do with the idea that a name can be a racial identifier. And to the degree that you Google a name that can be a racial identifier, you will find this. So again, I wasn't trying to make a political statement. I was trying to figure out my relationship to my father, which is why I ended up making this movie, which is called Exhibiting Forgiveness. And in fact, it is on Hulu, not Netflix, because Netflix doesn't like me for some reason. But I wrote this movie and something in me changed. If there are any writers in the room, you know this. When you have to write a character, if you want that person to feel real, you have to invest in their whole backstory. You cannot just decide, that is my villain. You can't do that. It will be a flat straw character. And so for the first time in my life, I had to ask myself questions about my father, my relationship to my father, but my father's past. Why did my father end up the way that he did? Why was addiction laid out for him so easily? My family originally left Mississippi and moved up to Michigan. They moved up to Michigan to get those great factory jobs. But within the few generations, because we came at the end, all of those jobs were gone. Deindustrialization. Side note, I'm arguing that this new movement of AI is going to be another deindustrialization. That's a talk for another time. But what is happening in that moment is all of those people in my community are losing their jobs. All of the factories that were in those places are gone. And so those hardworking people who did not have an education but were willing to work hard don't have a place to work anymore. And right as that's happening, drugs come into our community and devastate my side of town, and it still has not recovered since then. So now I have to write my father into that narrative, not as just this man who was mean to me. This whole context had to be clarified in order to make this make sense. And so I made this film. I told you at the beginning that I wanted to talk to you about the young people I work with. The truth of the matter is everything I've said before this is just an excuse to get to this, honestly. So I told you a little bit about my story, because that's kind of the same story as the young people that I work with. We are in New Haven, Connecticut. We are in the Dixwell neighborhood, which is 1.4 miles away from Yale, but it's a completely different universe. Historically black neighborhood, deindustrialized town, lots of factories and jobs that are now gone. What we do at Next Haven, we have a 45,000 square foot space designed by Deborah Burke, the Dean of the School of Architecture and my dear friend, in the middle of the hood, exactly where it's supposed to be. Every year, we select 7 artists and 2 curators to participate in our program. We give them funding, we give them housing, we give them studio space, we give them a curriculum around the business of art, and then all of them have to work with high school students. I believe I believe that creativity and imagination are superpowers. They're absolute superpowers. No matter what you do, being creative is not a negative thing. It's a good thing, right? Somebody answered. That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a superpower. I argue that for the young people I work with, creativity and imagination is more important than to any other community. Let me put it to you this way. When your father is a drug addict, actually, let me step back one step. Let's say your father is a doctor, and you become a doctor. That doesn't take imagination, it doesn't take creativity, it takes hard work. It takes dedication, it takes discipline, it takes a bunch of stuff. Step back again. Your father is a drug addict, and you become a doctor. That takes imagination and creativity. You have to imagine a life for yourself fundamentally different than anything that you have ever experienced. That's imagination, that's creativity. So when I talk to the mothers and the fathers of the young people I work with, and they say to me things like, why in the world would I allow my child to be in your program? He's a good student. He doesn't need to be in the arts. I say, I'm not actually interested in your child becoming an artist. I want them to be empowered by their superpower, creativity and imagination. And in communities like ours, art classes, the school right down the street from us, is canceling the art classes. What did I tell you at the beginning? I was in my mid-20s by the first time that I realized I wasn't stupid and that my brain just functions differently. I need images. I work through paintings. That made sense to me. I don't want that to happen for another generation. You guys should come visit us. Thank you.
Titus, thank you so much for that powerful presentation. And if anyone in the audience has not been to Next Haven, you absolutely have to go. It's an extraordinary place, and you can get a very special tour, and we can share some of that with you. I just want to thank all of you for coming today. Deep thanks to our other speakers, Christy, Ed, Layla, Kathy, Sarah, and to my American Wing colleagues who are with us today, who really made the Centennial Reinstallation all that it is. And also to education colleagues, Isaac Poole and Mariana Siciliano, for their hard work on putting this together. And then finally, just full gratitude to all of you for spending a Saturday with us. Thank you for your support of art, history, and culture, which of course continues to matter deeply to so many, particularly now, more than ever. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.